For Block 20, Section 34 was the 15th of September 2012.
2012. Thank you, Chief Minister. Other matters arising from question time? We'll get back to business. Clerk.
Next order of the day, resumption of the debate on the motion of Ms Cody relating to the services provided by government.
Question is that the motion be agreed to. Ms Lakuta.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Greens support Ms Cody's motion, and while we'd prefer that the motion's called on the government to go further, do more and be better, it is important to sometimes reflect on those achievements that we have in fact achieved. I mean, it's the dumb thing to think of all politics as being self-aggrandising and back-patting, but the truth of the matter is that sometimes we actually do lose sight of all the things we've achieved while we're focusing on the things that we need to do and the problems we need to solve. The Greens are particularly bad at this. We're too busy thinking about saving the world, and we never take the time to congratulate, or seldom take the time to congratulate, community activists and our members on all the changes their hard work has secured over the years. We're a young party, we're 25 years old this year, but we have achieved a lot in that time, inside and outside the government, inside and outside Parliament. We have become the body politic for activists and radicals and the voice for the voiceless, the homeless, the refugees, animals and nature. Those opposite, some people, let's leave it at that, like to think the Greens don't achieve anything or stand for anyone. But I'd like to just go through some of the things that the ACT Greens have achieved this year. In addition to working with our colleagues in ACT Labor in providing the world-class healthcare, education, transport and city services and all the other essential business of government that Ms Cody has spoken about, the ACT Greens have been instrumental in a number of major reforms and initiatives to improve the lives of Canberrans and protect our environment. In the gaming and racing space, we've worked with the government to phase out the harmful greyhound racing industry. We're working with community and advocates to introduce FPOS limits on pokie machines and improved transparency for social assessment. Impact assessments ensure bet limits and mandatory pre-commitments form part of the Canberra Casino legislation, advance the conversation around reducing gambling harm in the community. In the drug law reform space, we fought very hard to get pill testing up and running in Canberra before spilt milk. And we are very disappointed that has not happened, and if it's not entirely clear why this didn't happen, but we are very disappointed right now, but we are hopeful that come the future, the ACT will be leading Australia in minimising the harm from illicit drug use. When it comes to putting the community first, it's always been the ACT Greens have been the party that listens to the community. That was the focus of our campaigns for years and years, and in this Assembly it's one of our key focuses. As part of the parliamentary agreement, we've had an inquiry, or there is an inquiry, which we'll be reporting shortly into Independent Integrity Commissioner for the ACT, due to report back this month. We have made sure that community voices were heard as part of the public housing renewal projects in Western Creek, and I'm very pleased that the outcomes of that seem to have had a much greater level of community acceptance than at the beginning. We've introduced world-leading participatory budget trial for the ACT City Services budget starting in 2019. There's also, of course, the deliberative democracy trial with CTP. Under my colleague Mr Rattenbury's ministerial responsibilities for justice and mental health, with the creation of a dedicated Minister for Mental Health being an ACT Green election commitment and ACT First, we've committed to setting up the ACT's first Office for Mental Health and Drug and Alcohol Court as part of the parliamentary agreement, continue the work on justice reinvestment, Yarrabee Bemara and the restorative justice programs, improved educational outcomes for people in our correction systems with the expansions of the AMC's industry program, with the bakery being launched a couple of days ago. We've responded to community concerns by calling upon the federal government to immediately remove all refugees from Manus Islands and Nauru detention centres and resettle them here in refugee welcome zones, including, of course, the ACT. Leading the way on reforming the ACT sexual assault and privacy laws, starting with a petition, a discussion paper and legislation which formed part of the legislation which was eventually adopted in a wonderful spirit of tripartisan cooperation on criminalising the non-consensual sharing of intimate images, and we intend to continue this with a look at the ACT's consent laws. And also, of course, I personally have been very concerned with planning matters. So, as we talked about this morning, very much, it's very important for the Greens to see that the community's voice is respectfully heard for in all planning debates. I mean, that was a primary, that and the environmental issues, and of course good planning outcomes were what was the focus of the debate this morning, and I'm very pleased that Ms Lauder, the Liberal Party and the Greens were able to come to an agreement which will lead to a significantly better outcome for the community. Also, where we've been looking at better outcomes for the community. In Curtin, the proposed development was stopped, and there is currently a community panel process which I am hopeful will have a better outcome than the federal golf course one did on the basis of the feedback I've had from community members. I think that is possible. Certainly it's an area that we'll keep working on. There's also been a commitment from the government to review their approach to calculating the lease variation charge after concerns from both the industry and the community sector that without some compromise, affordable housing could be held back in the ACT. Speaking of affordable housing, I was very pleased to be able to attend the Housing and Homelessness Summit that the government ran last week. This, of course, was a parliamentary item of agreement, and I look forward to considerable progress being made in this space following the summit. At the summit, Minister Berry announced the Housing Innovation Fund, again part of the parliamentary agreement, which will be funding, hopefully, home share, home ground, and a potential Nightingale project. Although I note the Nightingale project should not require government funding, mainly planning support. And earlier this year, my motion calling on the government to investigate a vacancy tax was passed by the Assembly and I believe will be implemented. And earlier still, we secured an agreement from the government to include the City Renewable Authority and the Suburban Land Agency for both of them to have targets for affordable public and community housing and environmental sustainability requirements. Yeah, one of the things that is important for the Greens is to move past the siloing of policy areas when it comes to urban design, and to having government and all of the Assembly recognise the interconnectivity of urban planning, housing, building design, climate change and the environment. It's one city, we need to make it sustainable. The Greens are also the only party in the Assembly which is talking about population growth and the need to think of different ways for measuring performance of our community, not just economics. We need to look at what gross national happiness in the way that Bhutan does. I mean, we're not here just for the money. We've been laughed at and accused of being radicals for talking about alternative economy, but if we are serious about tackling inequality and climate change, we need to be serious about these conversations. This is particularly so when it comes to population growth. There are finite resources, both locally and globally. We talked about that a few sitting periods ago of Mr Steele's motion, but it's still here. We need to think about how, as a local and a global community, we have to look at reducing population growth to a level that the world can sustain, and how that we can equitably spread resources to everyone without destroying our one and only planet. On a small one here on that locally, the ACT finally has a big win, something the Greens have been pushing for a long time since the 2004 election. We're going to have a container deposit this scheme. Also in this space, we've secured funding for community climate action through the new zero net emissions projects, and the parliamentary agreement has seen improving Canberra's active transport network with a 30 million extra expenditure on walking and cycling infrastructure as part of the parliamentary agreement. The parliamentary agreement also has money for improved auditing of building certifies, better work as far as building quality and energy efficiency regulations. Energy efficiency regulations are something that we really need to do better work on than we have at present. And one of the nicer things this year is my motion for demonstration housing precincts was passed by the Assembly, and I'm very hopeful that we will start doing some world-leading showcase housing, particularly medium density housing in Canberra, in a way that Canberra did in the past. Ms Lauder this morning talked about the halcyon days of the NCDC, and while I don't think anyone here probably would like to see them back, I think one of the things that we can remember that they did do was try to experiment at different things to see would they work and wouldn't they work. We need to do more demonstrations, showcase projects in the way that Canberra used to do and still can, and positively we committed to as a result of the motion earlier this year. So, in short, we have achieved a lot this year. It feels more standing here and reading it out than I sort of think. And so I thank Ms Cody for this chance to remind us all of the fact that while there is still an awful lot to be done, some of it has been done and we are going at least partially in the right direction. Thank you, Ms Cody.
Thank you, Ms Lakuta. Question is that the motion be agreed to. Mr Steele.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank Ms Cody for bringing this motion forward. The ACT Labor government went to the last election with a positive plan to invest in our schools, hospitals, transport infrastructure and our neighbourhoods. And at the 1 year mark, it is nice to be able to reflect on the first year of government in the new term and what we've already delivered, particularly in my electorate in Woden, Western Creek, the Molonglo Valley and Canberra, all the while returning our budget to surplus and maintaining our world-leading credit rating. Our commitment to strong fiscal management means we can invest in the infrastructure our growing city needs and deliver policies and programs that work to foster inclusion and support the most vulnerable in our community. Madam Speaker, our investments and our priorities reflect our community's progressive values, and we're investing in education with upgrades to schools, particularly in Western Creek and Woden, planning a new school in the Molonglo Valley, and investing in our 10-year health plan, as well as investing in the Canberra Hospital, planning our new nurse-led walk-in centre for the south side, and building an integrated public transport system fit for our growing city with light rail stage 2 and new rapid bus services, all the while investing in the regeneration of our group centres. I want to briefly take us through the record of delivery for the south side in my electorate over the past year. I'm incredibly proud of what we've already delivered in Canberra. The government started and completed $300,000 investment in stage 1 of the upgrades to Canberra Village. It has made an incredible difference to the use and amenity of the square and courtyard and the pride of local community as well. And in the budget, the government funded $2 million needed for the final stage of the upgrades that will make more significant improvements to the village. In Canberra, we're rolling out green bins for plant matter, as well as in the suburbs of Western Creek. We've improved Canberra's transport connections by establishing a new park and ride and a new bus stop on Athlone Drive so that people can catch the rapid services, including the new Purple Rapid, which was announced last week for 2018. We've started upgrades to Ankertel Street in Tuggeranong through our investment of $3 million in the budget, and moving north to the Woden Valley, the government has made significant progress on one of the central city building projects of this term of government, the early stages of Light Rail Stage 2, which will take Capital Metro from the city to Woden Town Centre. The government engaged in extensive consultation on the potential route alignment and stop locations, with online feedback, written submissions, public meetings and visits to local community groups. The government has also already invested millions of dollars in developing the business case and creating detailed modelling for Stage 2 of the project, a project which will be transformative for Woden in the wake of years of Commonwealth cuts and relocations since 2013. Very committed to the regeneration of Woden Town Centre, and earlier this year we hosted a Woden Renewal Roundtable with businesses and community groups that has fed into the proposed Territory Plan variation. We've introduced new green rapid buses that takes passengers from Woden Town Centre through to the employment hubs of Barton and Manuka to the city every 15 minutes. And the government has invested in the construction and operation of a large-scale bus depot in Phillip in the budget as well. We're revitalising Woden Library by expanding activity and group spaces available for bookings to the public and community groups, and freeing up space previously used by the ACT Heritage Library. And works have commenced on the $6.2 million investment in the redevelopment of Phillip Oval. Madam Speaker, we're also investing in our 10-year health plan and our hospital at Woden. A significant investment of $236 million to start work on building the new Surgical Procedures, Interventional Radiology and Emergency Centre, the Canberra Hospital. And finally, Madam Speaker, we are a Labor government and we invest in the education of young Canberrans, particularly in providing great learning environments at our public schools. The Woden School, Curtin Primary will both be beneficiaries of investments to refurbish learning and teaching areas. My old primary school, Torrens Primary, has also benefited from courtyard upgrades launched by Minister Yvette Berry. The Malcara School will soon have a new front office and administration area, as well as general upgrades to facilitate and provide for future capacity. And the ACT government is investing in Melrose High to improve its heating and cooling systems. And that is in addition to the $6.6 million that we were able to deliver the Melrose Football Precinct with earlier this year. Madam Speaker, in Western Creek, the $300,000 upgrades to Coolman Court are now underway. Likewise, work has progressed on the new dog park for Western Creek in the suburb of Duffy. The government has also commenced early planning processes for a new nurse-led walk-in centre in the Western Creek region, which will support the health of our Southside community for years to come. And at Mount Stromlo High School, the school there and the community and students are benefiting from roofing upgrades and better insulation at the school's premises. In the newest part of my electorate, in the Molonglo Valley, almost $1 million in funding is underway for early planning work for major new roads, including a new east-west arterial road to the Tuggeranong Parkway, extension to Bindubi Street, and upgrades of John Gorton Drive to William Hovell Drive are now underway. Transport connections in the Molonglo Valley are being improved through the Cod Road duplication, which is due to finish early next year, and the establishment of the 182 bus service, the Western Line, which travels from Woden through to the Molonglo Valley and to the city. And that is set to become an orange rapid next year. And Molonglo residents have already welcomed this announcement with me on the weekend and are looking forward to the future connections to Molonglo to Belconnen, which were also announced last week. In education, the ACT government has invested $500,000 towards the early planning stages for a new school to provide for students in the Molonglo Valley, and particularly Damon Prospect. More broadly, the Territory's first park and pedal station was launched this year on the edge of the Lindsay Pryor National Arboretum, which will now allow residents from the south side to drive to the stop and then ride the rest of the journey into the city. Madam Speaker, this is a long list of achievements in just a short time, and I think it just reflects on how committed the government is to delivering for the south side, commitments that ACT Labor promised and which those opposite often fought against in light rail, nurse-led walk-in centres and green bins, which Liberals did not commit to fund at all in the case of shopping centre upgrades, new schools and new roads in Molonglo, or did not commit to fund enough to actually deliver the projects properly, such as school upgrades where they committed less, Cotter Road duplication where they committed less, and their piecemeal health plan. But we are getting on with the job of delivering our significant suite of policies. I look forward to delivering on the rest of our commitments over the term for Murrumbidgee and for Canberra. I commend Ms Cody's motion to the Assembly.
The question is the motion be agreed to. Ms Orr.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On 15 October 2017, the 9th Legislative Assembly for the Australian Capital Territory turned 1. It means that in the ACT we've just completed 12 months of having elected representatives dedicated to the area of Yerrabee. And in that sense, it's well worth looking back on what has been achieved for the people of Gungahlin and North East Belconnen over the first year of this expanded Assembly. We are getting on with investing in Yerrabee schools. I've already spoken at length in this place about the ACT budget delivering $85 million in upgrading and expanding classrooms. Public school enrolments in the north of Canberra have grown by 53% over the last 5 years. The bulk of that has occurred in my electorate of Yerrabee. The investment the ACT government is making in schools in Yerrabee will go a long way towards providing a world-class public education to the school children entering the second fastest growing region in the country. We're investing in biodiversity. The ACT budget announced the expansion of the predator-proof fence around Mulligan's Flat. The joint venture taking place behind these fences is reintroducing animals that haven't been seen on the mainland in over 50 years, while also protecting the largest and most intact area of yellow box and red gum grassy woodland in Australia. All of this is taking place on the doorsteps of the suburbs of Ford and Throsby. We're improving our transport system for the people of Yerrabee. Many of you would have been excited to see the recent laying of the first tracks of the Gungahlin to Civic Light Rail. This government is actively investing in public transport infrastructure to support an integrated transport solution that will take cars off the road, allowing a faster and safer commute for those who must choose to drive. We're planning for a more user-friendly Gungahlin town centre. The light rail terminal will be accompanied by a new shareway along Hibberson Street, allowing greater pedestrian access to businesses and the activation of existing public spaces. And we're working with the community to shape their local areas. In Yerrabee, I've been fortunate to be afforded a great deal of freedom to pilot an engagement program in delivering an ACT Labor election commitment to develop a community park for the wonderful people of Girrawong. As part of this process, we asked the community what they would like in their park, rather than asking whether they liked what we were proposing. My team has been out door knocking and surveying local residents, and the feedback is currently being used by University of Canberra landscape architect students to develop concepts for the design of the park. This will all come together at the end of this year when the Girrawong community will be invited to a town hall type meeting to tell us if the concepts we have identified through this process reflect what the community wants from its park. There has already been so much achieved for the people of Yerrabee, and I'm excited by the prospect of what else we can deliver for the community in the 3 years remaining in this term.
The question is that the motion be agreed to, Ms Chaney.
Thank you, Mr Assistant Speaker. I also stand today to celebrate everything that this ACT government has achieved in its first year. It's with great pride that I was sworn into this Assembly a year ago next week. I've spoken often about the profound sense of home I have found in Belconnen, and I was extremely humbled to be elected to serve my electorate of Ginninderra. 1 year on, and I can unequivocally say that the people of Ginninderra have shown me that they are creative, intelligent and resourceful members of the Canberra community. I've been lucky to have already met so many people in my electorate from all walks of life to discuss how we can continue to make Ginninderra a wonderful place to live. And it's been with great pleasure that I've seen many of the government's election commitments for Ginninderra already implemented or underway in the first year of this term. Projects across the spectrum of education, infrastructure, health, recreation and the arts are boosting the local economy and injecting new life into the region. This year we allocated funds for the third stage of Belconnen High School's modernisation. Stages 1 and 2 delivered a major refurbishment of student learning and teaching spaces, as well as a new school administration area. A further $5.9 million was committed in this year's budget to refurbish technology areas, replace the roof of a building and upgrade outdoor learning and teaching environments. This further investment will help the school meet future enrolment needs in the Belconnen area and will also improve the school's environmental sustainability. Lake Ginninderra College, Aranda Primary and Melba Copeland are also sharing in the $85 million for school classroom and facility upgrades that are happening across Canberra. This government has a long-term vision for an integrated transport network that allows Canberrans to move easily across the city and engage in active travel wherever possible, including children and the elderly. Active travel across the Belconnen Town Centre will get much easier with money committed for the Belco Bikeway this year. A separated bike path will be constructed which will help connect the major landmarks in the town centre, but also the town centre to the neighbouring suburbs and, importantly, the University of Canberra. The Belco Bikeway will be complemented, or is complemented, I suppose, by the new Belconnen Learn to Ride Centre at Lake Ginninderra. The Learn to Ride Centre opened mid-year and replicates real riding conditions, complete with replica roads, paths and pedestrians. Young riders can hone their cycling skills and learn to negotiate real-life distractions and obstacles. The centre helps Canberra kids get ready to use active travel to and from school, and eventually it will connect with the Belco Bikeway too, I hope. Active travel will also get easier around Page, with the suburbs sharing $1.5 million with Hughes, as you know, for better footpaths, crossings and traffic islands as part of the Age-Friendly Suburbs program. The government also announced, as we've heard, improvements to the bus network to better connect the Belconnen and Gungahlin town centres. As both town centres undergo significant growth, the government has acted to meet the demand for better inter-centre travel. The new Black Rapid bus route travels between Gungahlin and Belconnen every 15 minutes or better on Monday to Friday. As well as providing quicker travel times, riders are also benefiting from 12 months free travel. We've also continued to deliver on our commitment to build better health facilities in the region. The construction of the new UC Public Hospital has progressed significantly during this year, with around 300 workers on site every day. The $212 million hospital will provide world-class healthcare with the first dedicated subacute and mental health rehabilitation services in the ACT. In this year's budget, we committed $16 million to operationalise the hospital in preparation for its opening in 2018. In its first year, the government has also shown its support for the creative arts in Ginninderra. We're conscious of the importance of art in promoting a creative and happy community and have made significant commitments to fund art spaces around the electorate. The Link at Ginninderra was officially opened in April this year, and it has created in itself new opportunities for the arts in West Belconnen. The Link is a new architecturally designed space alongside the Strathnairn Arts Facility where artists can make and exhibit their work. We also acted on our commitment to fund Stage 2 of the Belconnen Arts Centre. $15 million in this year's budget is funding a multi-use town hall and performance space, improvements to workshop spaces, new dance studios and an expanded exhibition space in the Arts Centre. The Belconnen Arts Centre is an arts hub in my electorate and akin to a town hall, and this development comes off the back of an active campaign by many people, including the volunteers, the staff and the board at the Belconnen Arts Centre, as well as the broader community, who campaigned with a huge community backing. I'm watching Stage 2 of the development unfold with great anticipation. My electorate has also benefited over the last year with upgrades to recreation facilities. And like Ms Cody, as a dog owner, I know firsthand the importance of dog parks as a resource for dog owners, especially in high-density areas such as the Belconnen Town Centre. The parks not only give our canine friends a chance to stretch their legs, they also give owners an opportunity to relax and meet others in the community. The Belconnen Dog Park got an upgrade this year with 2 water stations, plenty new shade trees and resurfacing of bare ground areas, as well as a new seat in the smaller dog park, which I've been, of course, making use of. The improvements beautified the dog park and made it a more comfortable place to pass the time while our dogs run around. The government's efforts in Ginninderra have extended to other initiatives too. We've started planning for the expansion of Bindooby Street and planning upgrades to William Hovell Drive. Local community organisations have also been supported, with the Ginninderra Catchment Group sharing in $125,000 worth of grants to enhance their Frogwatch data portal. The government has also made planning changes to promote economic growth in the region. A territory plan variation to provide greater flexibility for UC in the development of its campus was approved this year. This forward-looking move will enable billions of dollars of investment in the area, delivering jobs and development for Belconnen. As you can no doubt tell, Mr Assistant Speaker, a significant amount of change is underway in Belconnen, particularly in the town centre. And with this in mind, I've put out the call for a Belconnen showcase, an opportunity for local businesses, development, government and other interested parties to meet and discuss the future of the town centre. The showcase has the potential to provide a full picture of what's happening in the town centre, to encourage all members of the community to ask questions and get up to speed about the changes underway, and to reinforce and reinvigorate activity in the town centre. I look forward to continuing to work with government to bring the showcase to fruition. Mr Assistant Speaker, I'm extremely proud of what this government has achieved in only the first year of our term. I've reeled off a long list of projects today, and I know I'm barely scratching the surface perhaps. Every electorate in Canberra has similar stories to tell as we've heard, not to mention the major projects such as light rail and the West Basin development, which will improve the city for everyone's enjoyment. All I can say is to finish, Mr Assistant Speaker, if this is what we can do in just 1 year, I look forward to the next 3 years with very high expectations and a great willingness, like you and other members in this place, to continue delivering for our community.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Ms Cody.
Thank you, Mr Assistant Speaker. I would just like to echo the words of all of my colleagues and Ms Includa here today for the wonderful things and the positive achievements this government has been able to deliver in the first year of government. It's a shame those opposite spent most of there were only one speaker talking about negative things and all the terrible stuff that they have never ever shown support for. I know Mr Coe raised education and funding for teachers, and I know that this government spends a lot of time ensuring that teachers are well protected in their workplace and given the support and the encouragement they need to provide people like me, as a product of ACT public education system, the chance to be whatever they'd like to be. I'm very proud to stand here today in support of all of the initiatives that this government has delivered, not only in this term but in previous terms, to support our educational officers, teachers, support staff and all those working in our schools. I'd also like to talk about not only what we have achieved, everyone else has certainly raised a lot of the great, wonderful things we've achieved in our first year, but things we're working on and working towards. Health in the ACTs, the public health system in the ACT is a fabulous health system. Unfortunately, recently I've had to spend a fair bit of time at Canberra Hospital for helping friends and family out. And whilst there, you note the wonderful commitment that this government has provided to developing and building on the infrastructure and the processes and procedures and all of the staffing that goes into running the Canberra Hospital, and the wonderful opportunities people in the ACT have to access such a great hospital. The nurse-led walk-in centres, you know, the commitment to have a nurse-led walk-in centre in Western Creek, wonderful commitment by the government, and I'm looking forward to the continued work to deliver that. I know, Mr Steele, you raised the redevelopment of the Phillip Oval. Although it's only about halfway completed, it's going to make such a difference for the Woden area. And I know my local AFL team, as is your local AFL team, the Woden Blues, are looking forward to getting back out there in the next season and running on the wonderful ground when it's completed. I guess in closing today, I'd just like to thank the people of Canberra, and particularly the people in my electorate of Murrumbidgee, for the opportunity to be here in this place and being able to deliver on all of the good achievements for this ACT Bar government. And I look forward to the coming 3+ years that we maintain government to continue to deliver on these wonderful projects and improve and make the Canberra we love even better. Thank you.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Aye. For the contrary, no. I declare the ayes have it. Clerk.
Private members' business, notice number 4.
Mrs Kickett.
I seek leave to move the motion standing on the notice paper in Mr Coe's name relating to the data collection on juvenile offenders.
Is leave granted?
Yes.
Mrs Kickett.
Thank you. I move the motion standing in Mr Coe's name on the notice paper relating to data collection on juvenile offenders.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Mrs Kickett.
Thank you, Madam Assistant Speaker. I move that this assembly notes that currently the ACT government does not collate data of juvenile offenders who have gone on to be incarcerated in the Alexander McConaughey Centre. Recidivism is one key indicator of the effectiveness of juvenile justice interventions. That the government's blueprint for youth justice in the ACT 2012-2022 lists amongst its goals that youth reoffending is reduced and includes the following indicator for successful reintegration into the community: number and rate of young people who reoffend both as young people and young adult offenders. And also, as noted by the Australian government's Australian Institute of Criminology, large numbers of juvenile offenders progress to the adult correction system. That tracking recidivism only within the youth justice system as opposed to across both jurisdictions therefore fails to create an accurate and complete picture. And consequently, the AIC report measuring juvenile recidivism in Australia states that measuring juvenile recidivism requires access to data on offenders in both the juvenile and adult justice systems, and that tracking juveniles into the adult criminal justice system is crucial to enabling jurisdictions to produce accurate and meaningful measures of recidivism and to reduce this recidivism. Yet, according to a question on notice from the 4th of August 2017, the ACT government is unable to provide reliable data on the number of sentenced young people in the ACT who go on to serve custodial sentence at the AMC. So therefore, we call on the government to recognise the important contribution to accurate and meaningful data collection provided by tracking the progression of juvenile offenders into adult corrections within the territory, and B, to establish policies and mechanisms that will allow for the robust collection and sharing of these data, including the usual indicators of male or female, Indigenous or non-Indigenous, and other relevant indicators. And finally, and to commence implementation of this data collection by the beginning of the 2018-19 reporting year. I am pleased to move this motion today and to address this very important topic relating to young people in this territory. In the past, children who broke laws were treated no differently than adults, with even very young children imprisoned and punished alongside grown-up offenders. Those were definitely not the good old days. Thankfully, it is now widely acknowledged, both in Australia and internationally, that juveniles should be subject to a system that is separate to the adult system, one that recognises their inexperience and their immaturity. Having a distinctive justice system for young people is based in large part upon what we know separates juvenile offenders from adult offenders. As all of the parents in this space will no doubt attest, kids are not just smaller versions of grown-ups. As the government's blueprint for youth justice makes clear, and I quote, "Children and young people are biologically different from adults. This is particularly true for the brain and how it functions. Growing children have not yet developed full competence in decision-making, and they tend to consider risk from social and emotional perspectives, being heavily influenced by their peers. The central purpose of a juvenile justice system, therefore, is to help young people grow out of crime as they continue to develop cognitively and socially, hopefully adopting law-abiding lifestyles as adults. To give them the best chance at this, jurisdictions around the world do things like prohibit the naming of young offenders or the recording of their convictions. The goal is to avoid stigmatizing them as criminals, which could entrench them in the criminal justice system. Because they are young and lack maturity in judgment, we seek to make it easy for them to put any offending well and truly in their past and move forward into responsible, law-abiding adulthood. I strongly suspect that a number of us in this chamber today have been personally benefited by this wise approach to youthful indiscretion. As Kelly Richards, a research analyst with the Commonwealth Government's Australian Institute of Criminology, or AIC, has observed, because young people are neither fully developed nor entrenched within the criminal justice system, interventions can have an enormous impact on them. This is good when the interventions are effective, but to quote Richards again, conversely, the potential exists for a great deal of harm to be done to juveniles if ineffective or unsuitable interventions are applied to juvenile justice authorities. It therefore becomes extremely important to be able to assess the suitability of what happens in our youth justice system. To quote from the government's Blueprint for Youth Justice, programs, initiatives and services must be grounded in evidence and regularly evaluated to ensure effectiveness and efficiency. Though it is not the only way to measure this, recidivism is widely acknowledged to be one of the key indicators of the effectiveness of juvenile justice interventions. This is a point that has likewise been endorsed by the Blueprint for Youth Justice, which has as one of its stated goals that the number and rate of young people who re-offend will be reduced. The way we track how many young people re-offend, however, is also important. As noted by the AIC, older studies into youth recidivism in various Australian jurisdictions have exclusively looked at incidences where youth have re-offended whilst still classified as young people. The results of this research has suggested that the probability of reconviction was small, approximately 30%. The same report notes that this information has strongly influenced juvenile justice policy, and it also shows up in a 2002 report prepared by the AIC for the ACT government. More recent research, however, has taken a much broader view and tracked repeat offending not just within the youth justice system, but well into adulthood. The results of one study carried out in New South Wales have, and I quote, challenged the long-held belief that most juveniles do not reappear in court after their first criminal conviction. In fact, it found that 68% of those appearing in the children's court reappeared in a criminal court within 8 years, either as youth or as adults. Another study carried out in Queensland found that most young offenders there re-entered the criminal justice system during their adult years. 79% of the offender cohort progressed to the adult correction system and served either a community corrections order or custodial order, with nearly half of the cohort serving at least one prison term. Based on statistics such as these, the AIC now acknowledges that, quote, measuring juvenile recidivism requires access to data on offenders in both the juvenile and adult justice systems. Failure to include both sources results in incomplete and therefore inaccurate data. In fact, the AIC has stated that, quote, tracking juveniles into the adult criminal justice system is crucial to enabling jurisdictions to produce accurate and meaningful measures of recidivism. For these reasons, I encourage this Assembly to call upon the government to begin tracking the progression of juvenile offenders into adult corrections within the territory. The Minister for Disability, Children and Youth has confirmed in answer to a question that I raised that the government is currently unable to provide this data, with what information that is available unreliable as a result of being self-identified and unverified. I understand the government's position that reporting on the movement of young people into interstate adult correction systems is currently unviable. Doing so within the territory should certainly be doable, however. We are a small jurisdiction with only one youth detention centre and only one adult prison. The two directorates that oversee both youth justice and adult corrections should face minimal trouble in tracking movement from one to the other over time. I understand that because people are transient and move interstate, this data will still not be perfectly complete. But as the AIC has indicated, it will certainly provide us a clearer assessment of the effectiveness of the territory's current juvenile justice interventions. It also has the added benefit of providing a more accurate picture of how those interventions are working for different subgroups amongst youth offenders. For example, the Queensland study already mentioned above found that 3 risk factors, being Indigenous, being male, and being in the care and protection system, greatly contributed to the likelihood that a young person in the youth justice system would eventually progress to adult corrections, with the probability of entering the adult system closely approaching 100% for those subject to multiple risk factors. I sincerely hope that we are doing a much better job than that here in the ACT with our interventions. But the only way to know is to collect and then analyse the data. Young people are valuable. I honestly hope that every member of this Assembly agrees with that statement. I believe in second chances. I believe in the reality of rehabilitation. I believe that young people who have gotten themselves in trouble deserve our best efforts to go forward, put those troubles behind them, and rise to great heights. This is an aspiration that has already been enshrined in the Blueprint for Youth Justice. One of the goals in that guiding document is that children and young people will be, quote, given every possible chance to be successfully integrated into the community upon leaving detention. And how are we to measure this? According to the blueprint, it will by measuring, and I quote again, the number and rate of young people who re-offend both as young and adult offenders. In the ACT, we do not know the number or rate of young people who re-offend as adults. This means that we cannot accurately determine if we are reaching this lofty goal or not. We must start collating this data and make it available so that we can know. I commend this motion to the Assembly. Thank you.
Question is that the motion be agreed to. Minister Stephen Smith.
Thank you, Mr Assistant Speaker. I move the amendment circulated in my name.
Wait. Sorry?
I move the amendment circulated in my name.
The question is that the amendment be agreed to. Sorry, caught me off guard there.
Thank you, Mr Assistant Speaker. In moving the amendment, I do wish to thank Mr Coe and, of course, Mrs Kickett for bringing this motion forward. I could not agree more that we should be aiming to reduce recidivism among young offenders. Of course, we should also be aiming to intervene early to prevent young people from becoming engaged with the youth justice system in the first place, something our award-winning 10-year blueprint for youth justice in the ACT has been remarkably successful in delivering over its first 5 years. I'll speak more about this shortly. It is clearly important that we monitor the effectiveness of youth justice services and the outcomes these services achieve for young people. In an ideal world, we would have a picture of the outcomes for all young people who've been engaged in youth justice that provides meaningful information to inform improvements to the system into the future. This is a far more complex aspiration than the collection of recidivism data for young people who have experienced a sentence in detention at Bimbri Youth Justice Centre who go on to serve a sentence at the Alexander McConaughey Centre or AMC. Nevertheless, measuring and reducing recidivism is important. That's why recidivism rates have been a strategic indicator for youth justice in the ACT for many years. Results in this year's Community Services Directorate annual report demonstrate low levels of recidivism for both young people who have served a custodial sentence and those who have been subject to community-based orders. The The 2016-17 recidivism rate for sentenced young people in custody within the youth justice system was 16.7%, with recidivism for young people on community-based orders being 15.8%. Both results are showing a downward trend over time and have significantly outperformed the 2016-17 targets. This is a positive result and reflects the youth justice system's focus on active case management, targeted interventions and prevention programs. While we should acknowledge and celebrate the success we have achieved to date, we should also, of course, always seek opportunities to improve, which is exactly what we're doing. As members are aware, the Blueprint for Youth Justice was implemented in 2012 to guide the strategic direction for youth justice. This whole-of-government, whole-of-community plan has allowed the ACT Government to monitor the effectiveness of the ACT youth justice system. The progress of the Blueprint's implementation has been reported to the Assembly regularly since it commenced. Mr Assistant Speaker, this government is committed to reducing the number of young people involved with the youth justice system and has been successful in meeting this aim since the introduction of the Blueprint. The Blueprint has a focus on early intervention, prevention and diversion, with custody as a measure of last resort. The success of the Blueprint in preventing young people from offending and entering the youth justice system is demonstrated by the decrease in offence rates over time and the decrease in the young people who experience a period of detention. For example, since 2011 and 12, there has been a greater than 30% decrease in the number of young people detained in Bimbri. There's also been a greater than 30% decrease in young people on community-based supervision orders. I'm pleased to note that these decreases in overall supervision rates have been matched by similar decreases in supervision rates for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people. Since 2011-12, the ACT has also experienced a steady and sustained decline in the number of young people being apprehended by ACT policing. That means the Blueprint, with its early intervention approach, has resulted in a safer community for all Canberrans. As members would be aware, we have reached the halfway point for the Blueprint, and earlier this year, I directed the Community Services Directorate to establish a new task force to take stock of how far we have come and to set directions for the second 5 years of the strategy. I've asked the task force to focus particularly on 3 areas: the continued overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander young people in the youth justice system, the experience of young people with disabilities, and how we can better support young people in their transition from detention back into the community. The Blueprint Task Force will meet for the 3rd time this Friday and has already identified some key focus areas for the second 5 years of the strategy. Over the coming months, the task force will lead a series of think tanks to work with the community on these issues. One area of focus is through care for the youth justice system. That is, how we support young people who are incarcerated to prepare for release and support them post-release from Bimbri. The Public Advocate and Children and Young People Commissioner, Ms Jodie Griffiths-Cook, facilitated a Through Care and Youth Justice roundtable discussion on the 10th of October, and input from this roundtable will inform the task force in its work. I'm pleased that we have such strong engagement from community partners across the system in undertaking this important work. Mr Assistant Speaker, the youth justice system is one we actually know quite a lot about. Recidivism rates currently measure the return of young people to the youth justice system after receiving a final court order and are an indicator of outcomes for young people, in particular where the interventions have been successful in assisting young people to exit the youth justice system. Recidivism rates are, however, just one measure of rehabilitation. Research highlights a decrease in seriousness of offending and delay in onset of offending as other critical measures for determining effectiveness of justice systems. Working with young people who have received a custodial sentence to reduce their offending behaviours requires considerable effort. Young people receive custodial sentences only as a measure of last resort. It is important to note, Mr Assistant Speaker, that once a young person has received a custodial sentence, they frequently have entrenched behavioural difficulties and limited supports in the community. Supporting young people in their efforts to rehabilitate, to change their behaviours that led to offending and to put them on a more positive pathway is an objective that we all share, but it is amongst the hardest jobs in government. And once again, I commend the commitment of the youth workers, teachers and other staff who work with young people in Bimbri. We know that the quality of programs and services provided to young people in Bimbri can maximise the chance of disrupting the trajectory of lifelong offending. I am pleased to be able to report that Bimbri has some of the most comprehensive and established services provided by government, but also by our community partners. I would like to remind the Assembly of the services and supports that are available to young people in Bimbri, including the extensive work of staff from the Murrumbidgee Education and Training Centre, including a school transition officer, specialist health and mental health staff from ACT Health, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff from Googangulwin and Winunga-Nimitajar, the Canberra Raiders and staff from PCYC, drug and alcohol specialists from Ted Knopf's Foundation and ACT Health Drug and Alcohol Service, Relationships Australia Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Counselling, Australian of the Year finalist Alan Tung, who delivers a variety of programs, and the Shine for Kids program. Mr Assistant Speaker, to directly address the motion and my amendment, as I have indicated, there is already an extensive and robust collection of data on youth justice matters. This data has been reported regularly in the Legislative Assembly through the Blueprint Progress Report. Data is also reported nationally by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare and in the annual report on government services. The motion goes to the collection of data for young people who later receive a sentence of detention as an adult in the AMC. I'm happy to stand today and agree in principle with this motion that data about adult offending outcomes for young people on release from Bimbri would add to the data that is already collected and reported about young people exiting youth justice. However, my amendment notes that many young people who have been in Bimbri, as Mrs Kickett acknowledged, moved to other jurisdictions, and it needs to be understood that any sampling from the sentencing of former ACT sentenced youth detainees to AMC would not be a complete picture. It is also important to understand that such a data collection engages with the privacy requirements in a very direct way. The need to understand the outcomes of the system must be balanced with the privacy of the young person, particularly those young people who go on to be law-abiding citizens. As Mrs Kickett noted, these young people have served their sentence and have the right to privacy. Their personal information should not be provided to others unnecessarily. That is why the sharing of identifiable information about young detainees for the purpose of data matching is not allowable by law. As my amendment also notes, the Justice and Community Safety Directorate is also not able to share information with the Community Services Directorate about adult offenders for this purpose. In this context, it is important to note that the AMC can seek youth justice information about individual prisoners from the Community Services Directorate, which can be important in supporting individual detainees. Mr Assistant Speaker, the ACT Government recognises the importance of monitoring data over time and agrees that understanding the trajectories of young people exiting Bimbri Youth Justice Centre is useful. In fact, it's imperative. That is why the Community Services Directorate is working with the Justice and Community Safety Directorate to establish a process to share de-identified information that will provide data on the numbers of young people exiting Bimbri who go on to be sentenced in the AMC. Data linkage work of this nature is technical and resource intensive and therefore may take some time. We need to ensure that appropriate privacy protections are in place for young people, including the inability to re-identify information. Appropriate data linkage policies and governance arrangements also need to be established to achieve a secure and reliable data source. As I've just mentioned, some young people who leave Bimbri move interstate and they may receive custodial sentences in other jurisdictions. Sharing this information across jurisdictions will require significant governance and infrastructure, agreement between jurisdictions, and a technical solution to physically match data across multiple client management systems. The scale of this level of information sharing could only occur through the appropriate COAG body's leadership. Mr Assistant Speaker, I support the matching of de-identified data for the purpose of monitoring youth to adult recidivism. Matching ACT data from Bimbri to AMC would be the logical place to start and is indeed where agencies are already starting. My amendments therefore propose that the preliminary work undertaken in this area be reported through the Blueprint Task Force. In undertaking this work, it is critical that the privacy, human rights and legislative implications for any proposals for information sharing are appropriately explored in order to provide a practical way forward. In closing, Madam Assistant Speaker, I note again the complexity of the youth justice system as a whole and the critical importance of continuing our nation-leading work on prevention and early intervention so that we continue to see very low numbers of young Canberrans being sentenced to Bimbri in the first place. And finally, acknowledge that those very low numbers add an additional complication to these data issues.
The question is that the amendment...
You can't respond.
Sorry. The question is that Ms Stephen-Smith's amendment to Mrs Kickett's motion be agreed to. Mr Rattenbury.
Thank you, Madam Assistant Speaker, and I welcome the fact that Ms Kickett has brought this motion forward today. It is an opportunity to discuss, I think, a number of areas of relevant policy in this space: data sharing, recidivism, and information sharing generally, which I think are all interesting topics. I certainly agree that it makes perfect sense at a principle level to collect the data that enables the tracking of young detainees in the juvenile justice system to assess whether they end up in the adult criminal justice system and in the AMC. And I think on first blush it does seem very logical, particularly as the reduction of youth reoffending is a goal in the Youth Justice Blueprint. When we look deeper, it is important to realise there are a number of issues that need to be considered first before this can just occur. Not least of these, of course, is a young person's right to privacy. And I know Ms Kickett referred to that Mrs Kickett referred to that in her remarks about not wanting to have people stigmatised down the line. Because we want them, people who have been involved in the juvenile justice system, to be given a second chance, one that is not marred by a criminal record. As members are aware, individual privacy protections exist in a number of ways in the ACT, including in the Human Rights Act 2004, the Privacy Act 1988, the Commonwealth Privacy Act, and the Information Privacy Act 2014, ACT. So that creates quite a legislative framework of privacy considerations that do need to be dealt with. And I'll come back to that in a little while. But through the parliamentary agreement, this government has committed to reducing recidivism by 25% by 2025. Now, that's a very ambitious goal. And some people have expressed, I guess, some trepidation at setting a goal like that, but I think it is important that we do set a goal like that because it helps us shape policy, it helps us shape prioritisation, and it means that we are striving for something quite bold. But if we get it right, it will have a very significant impact on the lives of people who have got their lives a little off track or been led astray somewhere along the way. And if we can break that cycle of repeat offending, we can make a real impact on people's lives. To best achieve the target, the recidivism plan will be a shared responsibility across both youth and adult justice systems, but not just the justice systems. It actually is relevant to particularly the Community Services Directorate, the Education Directorate, the Health Directorate, through mental health particularly. There's a whole series of places across government where we need to work to make a positive impact on people's lives and help them overcome some of the factors that play out in later involvement in the criminal justice system. And this law requires a really good understanding of what works, supported by planning, innovation, efficiency and community engagement. Critical to this piece of work is the establishment of an agreed definition of what constitutes recidivism, against which a reduction can be measured. A recidivism plan will acknowledge the current measures of recidivism in the ACT as reported in the report on government services. Now, this is a particular way of measuring it, because the report on government services measures one part of the justice system, whether a person has received a conviction in a court and whether they have received a second conviction within 2 years. So that's the ROGS measure of recidivism. But I think there are other measures that we could contemplate as well. And certainly the complexity of criminal justice does invite us to think about some of those other things. It's something we've thought about very carefully through the measuring the impact of the extended through care program, where we do have examples of people who, in their adult lives, have never spent more than 4 or 5 weeks out of custody, where through support from the extended through care program, they've been able to spend up to 6 months out of custody before reoffending. Now, they have reoffended, but I think you can see that is a positive intervention in somebody's life and hopefully the beginning of further more extended periods out of custody. So there is some, I think, both careful thinking and some interesting debate about what measures we take of how we've reduced recidivism. There's a range of other measures that can be employed to measure recidivism, such as police discretion when dealing with offenders, using diversion options like restorative justice, and court responses that may prove an offence but not record a conviction. All of these are valid considerations in this discussion. Another critical component of a recidivism plan will be to establish a coordinated and accountable response across operational areas of the justice system, from program design, delivery and information sharing, which includes data linkage opportunities and evaluation, if we're going to achieve a 25% reduction in recidivism. Developing what it is going to take to meet recidivism targets, as I've outlined, is a complex piece of work because there is no simple solution. No single piece of work is going to change that figure by itself in the period that we're looking at. It will, as I said earlier, will require the combined efforts of a range of government agencies, but also a range of community partners and participation from those who have been involved in custody. Now, of course, we've got a range of things happening already, and Ms Stevens-Smith has spoken about the Youth Justice Task Force in her comments. I'd like to note the importance of communication between that and the Moss Review Steering Committee, who are looking at some of these issues, because there are a number of conclusions in the Moss Review that are relevant to this discussion today. Recommendation 9 of the Moss Review consolidated the conclusions mentioned through the report. One of these conclusions was that the AMC management would have access to all relevant information. Another conclusion of the Moss Review was that justice youth information should be available to the AMC when it is assessing the accommodation placement for new detainees. Additionally, the Glanfield inquiry recommended there be more information sharing and collaboration. Whilst the recommendations were made in the context of family violence and safety of individuals within that context, there is possibly scope for relevant information about juvenile detention history to be shared if it enhances the welfare and well-being of the young person or to manage risk to safety. ACT Corrective Services is working with Child and Youth Protection Services on establishing a framework for information sharing. This will allow AMC staff to have access to relevant information regarding a detainee's prior history in the ACT Youth Justice System. Relevant information might include whether the detainee has been in custody at Bimberi and whether they had separation issues affecting their ability to mix with other detainees. Now, of course, the ACT government takes privacy very seriously, and as I've said before, this is why work is being undertaken in conjunction with the Government Solicitor's Office and the Office of the Information Privacy Commissioner. I think this is a really tricky area of policy for government, and it's something I've identified in a number of portfolio areas that I've got responsibility for, is how we deal with the tensions of information privacy and the various acts that cover it compared to the opportunities that arise from sharing that information. And I think that goes to the heart of Mrs Kickett's motion today, is that that tension is there, and I do feel that in some areas the legislation, sometimes the legislation, and I think sometimes just the practice, means that we don't share information as much as we should. And I think that that is a significant policy discussion, and I think it's hard to have just in a removed way. In some cases it does come down to the individual matters, but I think there is scope to improve information sharing for the benefit of those whose information is held. I think this is something I'm contemplating in the mental health portfolio, certainly something that's relevant in the corrections space, I think is relevant in the education area. It is an important conversation to be had. And the other area to talk about is data collection. ACT Corrective Services is implementing a new Corrective Services Information Management solution known as CORIS. It is anticipated that this will be operational by the end of 2018. This system, with enhanced protocols, will improve data capture and reporting, and this is something I'm also very keen on, because at the moment I know it's a source of frustration for members of the opposition when they seek information. I can assure you it is a source of frustration for myself as the Minister and for our Corrective Services staff, but that much information about detainees and about incidents in the jail and patterns and various other things that we might want to report on, the data actually needs to be extracted manually. This is an enormously time-consuming process, and one that, with a better data management system, I think will enable us to make better informed decisions and potentially identify issues that are not clear at the moment because of the manual recording of data. So that is something that I think will assist with this process, and I think is consistent with the intent of this motion today. Ultimately, of course, our aim should be to keep young people who have been involved with the juvenile justice system out of the adult criminal justice system. And that, of course, is why the government has a focus on justice reinvestment programs and restorative justice options. And it's why we're establishing a drug and alcohol court, for example, and associated support programs as part of that goal to reduce recidivism by 25% by 2025. This notion of justice reinvestment, of being willing to spend money up front to avoid people ending up in the various justice systems, I think is such an important principle. One that, at times when you sort of look at potential expenditure on more police and some of these kind of things, there are times when we need to try and take that longer term decision to make an investment now that we know will pay off in a couple of years' time. And we know that it will pay us back in spades. But there are sometimes, I think, political and cultural challenges in actually seeking to defer what might seem like the immediate response and in fact try to take a longer term look at things. Anyway, on that, I'd simply like to conclude by saying that I welcome the opportunity to discuss these matters today. I think they are both fascinating but also really important areas to be concentrating on. I think it's elicited a good discussion today. Ms Stephen Smith, the Minister with responsibility for youth justice, has moved an amendment. The Greens will be supporting that. I think it outlines some of the work that's already underway and does pick up those constraints that exist on government when it comes to issues of privacy and information sharing. But I'm very committed to working with the Minister and with our staff in the various agencies to continue to improve these areas of both data collection and information sharing.
The question is that the amendment be agreed to. Mr Wall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to begin by thanking Mrs Kickett for bringing this important motion here before the Assembly today, and also acknowledge the work in the correction space that my colleague Mrs Jones is doing. Unfortunately, Mrs Jones had a family commitment this afternoon and has asked me to raise a number of comments relating to this issue. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is well documented that the ACT government has been struggling with the management of the Alexander McConaughey Centre, our main corrections facility. And there have been significant problems ranging from deaths to escapes and a lack of accommodation consistently plaguing the AMC. Now, there is something else to add to this list, and that is that we're not properly tracking youth who enter our adult corrections system. Recidivism is one of the key indicators of effectiveness of our justice system, and yet the ACT government does not collect adequate data on the number of sentenced young people in the ACT who go on to serve custodial sentences as adults in the Alexander McConaughey Centre. This is something the government should absolutely be doing. How can we measure the impact the government is having on rehabilitation of our youth who have a history of crime if the government doesn't collect verified data on whether or not they end up incarcerated as an adult? Relying on new inmates at the AMC to self-report with no verification process is simply not enough if we want to know the interventions that we provide are having any impact. The ACT government should begin to track the progression of juvenile offenders into adult corrections within the territory as soon as possible. We acknowledge that and appreciate that there may be some difficulties in reporting on the movements of young people into interstate corrections systems. Presently, that data collection is unavailable because of difficulties in dealing with several states and their separately run corrections systems. But perhaps this is an issue that could or should be raised at the COAG level in tracking and monitoring the impact of our corrections and effectiveness of our corrections systems across the country. However, achieving this sort of reporting in the ACT should not be difficult. We're a small jurisdiction, one juvenile facility, one adult facility, two directorates that oversee the operation of them, and should, in theory, face minimal trouble in tracking movements and the graduation from the juvenile into the adult system. Possibly, a simpler alternative would be tasking the court system with that. Therefore, you're only directing with one point of contact. Again, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to applaud Mrs Kickett for raising this matter. It is something the ACT government should be doing and measuring and tracking the effectiveness of our correction system, both at a juvenile level and also at an adult level. rehabilitation of our youth is too important. And I again congratulate Mrs Kickett on bringing this motion to the Assembly.
The question is that the amendment be agreed to. Mrs Kickett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wish to take a few moments to address Minister Stephen Smith's proposed amendments to this motion. First, the Minister wishes this Assembly to acknowledge the challenges in establishing a comprehensive recidivism indicator for youth justice that reflects outcomes beyond the youth justice system. Yes, there will be challenges, but I refuse to believe that tracking the progression of juvenile offenders into adult corrections within the territory is somehow too hard for this government. I wish to point out to those opposite that it does not make them appear very capable or competent to imply that the government of a jurisdiction small enough and compact enough that it has a single youth detention centre and a single adult prison, which according to Google Maps are only 24 kilometres apart by car, can't get its child and youth protection services and its corrective services to somehow align their data collection tools. The ACT Labor Greens government loves to talk about leading out in so many areas of policy. But this one is too challenging for them. I certainly hope not. If any jurisdiction in Australia is capable of collecting and sharing this data in appropriate ways, it should be the ACT. As Liam Nichols from Canberra's Aboriginal Legal Service has said on this issue, you have got to have stats for that. They are both part of the ACT government. There should be some sharing of information. Second, I acknowledge that there are legal concerns about the sharing of identifiable information. As I mentioned in my previous speech, there are very good reasons for this, and I support those reasons. It is important to note, however, that this motion, as originally drafted, included no expectation that anyone's privacy should be violated. We already collect and report all kinds of data that is stripped of identifying information, including data on recidivism within the youth justice system. If the government can collect and report this information without violating any laws, I expect them to get off their lazy behinds and develop a legal mechanism for collecting and reporting data across both the youth justice system and adult corrections.
Don't worry about it.
Order. Order. You had a point of order, Ms Stevenson? Okay, you don't have a point of order.
Sometimes truth hurts, doesn't it?
Order, Ms.
It hurts.
You've had a chance to speak, and if you want to have leave, you'd be able to speak again, but don't hector across the chamber. Ms Kickett has the floor. I don't think that there's a standing order about the tone or the volume at which a member presents a speech. Right. Mrs Kickett has the floor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think sometimes the truth hurts, and I completely understand that. If the new data system, CORIS, is able to do this, it is crucial that the government ensure that it is enabled to do so. I note that the Minister has raised the territory's youth recidivism rates, but I wish to remind this Assembly, according to the latest research, only tracking those who return to the youth justice system is missing half of the data. Lastly, I have to express my disappointment that instead of a clear commitment to a plan of action, we have been given what has become the usual for this government whenever any opportunity to really move forward arises. A promise to explore and to talk and explore with no sense of urgency or a willingness to commit to a specific time frame. What a shame, Madam Deputy Speaker. What a missed opportunity. If these amendments pass, please know that I will be holding the government to account to follow through and actually do something on this matter. I wish to express my appreciation to Andrew Wall and Julia Jones for their support in this important motion. I'm disappointed that we are not clearly committing to an outcome that would have been good for the territory's children and young people, and good for their families and those who worry about them. Tracking the progression of juvenile offenders into adult corrections within the territory just makes sense. It appears as one of the indicators in the government's blueprint for youth justice that will allow us to assess whether or not children and young people are given every possible chance to be successfully reintegrated into the community upon leaving detention. And it appears repeatedly as a recommendation in the latest research regarding how best to measure youth recidivism, which in turn allow us to assess the effectiveness of the interventions in our youth justice system. As research makes clear, kids get in trouble much more frequently than adults, but thankfully the trouble they get into is often far less serious. True effective interventions assist many youth in putting a past of offending behind them. This is an investment worth making. We should never be satisfied that kids in our territory who make mistakes have just started a journey into adult corrections. I hope that it is not what is happening now, Madam Deputy Speaker. But there is only one way to know. Tracking this data may provide us the assurance that we are getting many things right, but it would almost certainly highlight areas we could improve in. For the sake of our children and young people, I expect this government to pursue the necessary policies and mechanisms to allow for the collection of this information and then make the necessary improvements. Thank you.
The question is that the amendment be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. No. I think the ayes have it. No, division called for. Ring the bells. Now, Ms Chan, I understand there are 3 pairs in operation now, and there'll be 5. Might be 4?
Yes. So it's Mr Barr and Mrs Jones. Oh, no, it's not yet 5.
Yeah, it's not yet 5. There's 2, according to my schedule, that start at 5.
Mr Barr and Mrs Jones, Ms Fitzharris and Mr Oswald, and Mr President.
Not according to my list. Not on my list. open. Sorry? Oh, sorry. Sorry. Yes, sorry. Yes, sorry. It is confusing, sorry. I think all members are present who can be present. All members are present who can be present. Lock the doors. The question is that Ms Stephen Smith's amendment to Mrs Kickett's motion be agreed to. The clerk.
Mr Barr, Ms Berry?
Yes.
Ms Birch?
Yes.
Ms Chain?
Yes.
Ms Cody?
Yes.
Mr Coe?
No.
Dosspot? Mrs Dunn?
No.
Ms Fitzharris? Mr Gentleman?
Yes.
Mr Hanson?
No.
Mrs Jones? Mrs Kickett?
No.
Ms Lauder?
No.
Ms Lakuta?
Yes.
Ms Lee?
No.
Mr Milligan? Ms Orr?
Yes.
Mr Parton?
No.
Mr Pedersen? Mr Ramsey?
Yes.
Mr Rattenbury?
Yes.
Mr Steele?
Yes.
Ms Stephen Smith?
Yes.
Mr Wall?
No.
No test from me today. The result of the division is ayes 11, noes 8. Therefore, the question is resolved in the affirmative. The question now is that the motion as amended be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. The ayes have it. The clerk.
Move a leave of absence for Mr Dosspot from today's sitting, the 25th of October through to the 1st of December, for personal reasons.
Is the motion of leave agreed to? Yes. Thank you. Sorry, can I do it properly? Those of that opinion say aye. The contrary, no. The ayes have it. The clerk.
Private members' business, notice number 5.
Ms Lakuta.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I move the motion standing in my name on the notice paper relating to the protection of the tree canopy.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Ms Lakuta.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Could I ask members to keep the volume down? It is a challenge for Ms Lakuta, who doesn't have the loudest voice in the chamber.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. That statement, I'm afraid, is certainly true, but I'll do my best. Canberra's urban areas have over 750,000 ACT government-managed trees, and on top of this there are, of course, many hundreds of thousands of trees in people's front and backyards. These trees make a big difference to the quality of life, and they are highly valued by the Canberra community for the many benefits they bring. Members will, of course, have noticed that spring has arrived, even if it went backwards for a little while, and temperatures have started to rise with it. Within the next few months, or I suspect less than that, we may be in the heat of summer, and instead of enjoying 25-degree days, we'll be trying to stay cool in 35-degree days. How bearable the heat is and how much your cooling costs are will depend substantially on the trees on your block, your neighbours' blocks and the street out in front of your house. There is a well-known problem with living in cities, which is called the urban heat island effect. Many of the built surfaces in cities, roads, roofs, footpaths and so on, trap heat during the day and gradually release it in the late afternoon and evening. They also reflect heat around, including into our homes. Summer peak temperatures in our cities can be many degrees higher than in nearby non-urban areas. This is a problem that will only get worse as climate change continues. Trees, on the other hand, eliminate urban temperatures in the summer. The bigger and denser the canopy, the more they reduce the heat island effect. To quote from the ACT's Climate Adaptation Strategy section on urban heat island effect, in summer, localised temperature differences can be over 12 degrees Celsius between pavements on sun or shade. For people walking around, 12 degrees makes a huge difference. And of course, a 12 degrees difference between a shaded roof and an unshaded roof could make a huge difference to comfort within a house. Of course, trees are not just loved for their cooling impacts. In many suburbs, trees are an important part about what people love about their local neighbourhood. In older suburbs at this time of the year, the exotic trees put out their new leaves and all of a sudden the local landscape is filled with the light green of fresh spring leaves. For many years I lived in Downer, and one of the joys of living there was the big old claret ashes in my street. And one of the sad things has been the death in the last few years of many of these trees, partly through old age, but importantly partly through drought. In suburbs which were built more recently, there have been more native trees which provide better benefits for our local wildlife. Native trees in streets and parks can provide a corridor for bird species to move from one nature reserve to another, which is important for our biodiversity. And I know quite a few people have planted native trees and shrubs in their gardens to attract birds and bees and other parts of our biodiversity, and all of these benefits add up to measurable economic value. International research has shown that urban trees have a financial benefit in the order of tens of thousands of dollars through lower cooling bills and higher property values. Ideally, we'd get precise local values for this, and I'm sure they would be similarly large. While many suburbs of Canberra do have great tree canopy, some don't. For example, there are places where street trees chosen have proved not to be successful and the street trees do not provide good canopy cover. There's also many gaps in suburbs built from the 1990s onwards. During this time, there's been a change in the approach to design for suburbs. Streets were narrowed with less room for trees. Block sizes were reduced, but at the same time, the size of new houses got bigger. The result of these changes has been that in some suburbs, there is no room for large canopy trees in people's yards. There's also no room for large canopy trees in the street. People who live in these suburbs do not get the same benefits of trees as in older leafy suburbs, and of course the biodiversity benefits which I talked about don't occur either. However, as well as this, tree canopies in older suburbs are also under threat. Many older suburbs like Curtin and Garran are seeing rapid redevelopment. These suburbs traditionally had blocks from 700 square metres up to 1,400 square metres and small houses of 1 to 200, or smaller houses between 1 to 200 square metres, and this left room for many large canopy trees. Now, both multi-unit developments and McMansions are replacing the small existing dwellings, with the garden space that remains being a strip around the outside of the building. This sees the loss of almost all existing vegetation and leaves very little new room for canopy tree plantings. Finally, many of the ACT government's own trees are ageing and coming to the end of their life. This creates a difficult management challenge for the government. A 60-year-old tree that is dying may pose a safety risk, but it still provides a wide canopy and local visual amenity and provides significant local biodiversity positives. Replacement trees will take a long time to get back to the size of the tree that was there. This has a big impact on local shade and amenity for the creatures that we share our suburbs with, such as our magpies and our possums and our insects. The government has recognised these challenges, and the ACT Climate Change Adaptation Strategy includes the following action to be delivered by the end of 2018. Develop and implement a strategy to enhance living infrastructure in the Territory, including targets for urban tree canopy cover. That's welcome. However, I believe we need more than a strategy. We need an action plan to deliver it. We need to make regulatory changes, government systems, internal changes, and importantly, we need to plant more trees. I'll now step through in detail the actions that I believe are necessary and which are outlined under point 4 in my motion. Firstly, increasing our tree canopy cover requires the planting of more trees. Given we have a situation where some suburbs have great canopy cover and others are sadly lacking, I think the focus of planting should be to increase the canopy cover in areas without good trees. Obviously, this is likely to be a long-term process. We potentially need hundreds of thousands of extra trees, and their canopy will take decades to come to fruition. But this is exactly the kind of investment in the future that was made in the early days of Canberra, and there's no reason why we can't do it again. Secondly, we need regulatory review to ensure that development needs room for trees. There are two sets of rules that require attention. The Territory Plan covers what happens on leased blocks. The Transport Canberra and City Services Directorate has infrastructure design standards that cover the government's areas, streets in particular. These need a joint integrated review to make sure there is room for large canopy trees both in people's yards and the street out the front. I think planting more trees in Canberra will require action from both the government and from the people who live here and who value the trees. They just need space for them. The National Capital Authority has usefully provided a lead for us with the Territory Plan element of the review. Its Deakin Forest Residential Precinct Issues and Policy Paper, released earlier this year, has recommended a new approach to planning for redevelopment. It proposed the inclusion of precinct-wide tree canopy coverage target in the National Capital Plan and mandating a planting area that's not covered by driveways and buildings. People can choose whether or not to plant trees in the planting area, but if there isn't anywhere you could plant trees, they have no choice. Thirdly, we need to improve the ACT government's asset management process for its trees. Many Australian cities, including the City of Sydney and the City of Melbourne, are working on this, and the ACT government can learn from their work. Further, in 2011, the Commissioner for Sustainability and the Environment completed a review of the government's tree management practices, making extensive recommendations. Many of these are still relevant and should be looked at again. My motion mentions one directly, which is around the possible appointment of a tree curator for the ACT government's tree assets. Fourthly, our Tree Protection Act is starting to get old. It commenced back in September 2005. My motion includes a review of this Act to ensure that it is consistent with the targets. While there have been regular minor updates, the tree canopy targets are likely to require broader changes. Finally, my motion includes a sequence of government reports back to the Assembly so that members and the community can track the government's progress in setting tree canopy targets and then undertaking the wide-ranging work required to implement them. In conclusion, trees are highly valued by the community, both the human community and the other species that we share the ACT with. They have many benefits. Critically, they have an important role in ameliorating the urban heat island effect, which will only become more important as our climate warms. While many suburbs have good tree canopy cover, others do not, and there are others where existing tree canopy cover is being reduced by redevelopment. We need to take action to protect our existing trees and to increase our canopy cover where it is lacking. The government's existing commitment to deliver a living infrastructure plan with canopy cover targets is a great first step, but wide-ranging work will need to be done to implement it. This motion sets out a clear action plan to ensure that targets are met and that our canopy cover increases as our climate warms. I urge all members to vote for the trees, which are so highly valued by our community.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Ms Lauder.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank Ms Lakuta for bringing this matter before the Assembly today. I think it's fair to say that everyone living in Canberra in 2017 is delighted and proud of the magnificent tree landscape that we have. That's one of the features of our great city. Perhaps our beautiful trees have also contributed to Lonely Planet's selection of our city as the third best in travel for 2018, which has already been the subject of some discussion today. Ms Lakuta's motion notes that Canberra's urban areas include over 750,000 ACT government trees and talks about the value we all place on our well-treed streets, the temperature controls they provide, the increases that may come to property values because of the trees that are included. I'd also add that our trees add a wonderful procession of seasonal changes in our city. They're spectacular and inspiring. Don't just take my word for it. All you have to do is follow that gorgeous seasonal progression of photos on Instagram. The new spring growth that we see around at the moment, the deep shades of summer, the glorious colours of autumn and the stark beauty of our trees in winter. We all love our trees when they're appropriately selected and planted in the landscape. But Ms Lakuta's motion is not just about trees. It does have some, I guess, motherhood platitudes about trees and how lovely they are. But this motion also points to bureaucracy and red tape. And I think it actually has Ms Lakuta sitting on both sides of the solar panel and the tree target fence. Ms Lakuta bemoans the future absence of trees in new suburbs because of narrow streets, small house blocks and lack of trees. But at the same time, the demands for solar access have been a key feature of the Greens platform, demanding solar access for all. And as a result of Ms Lakuta's and the Greens' demand for better trees yet more solar access, we see flip-flopping government policy at play. The government talks a big game when it comes to solar panels on homes, but refuses to prune trees in existing panels to allow other older homes access to solar. And I'll give one example that I wrote to the Minister on earlier this year. My constituent has recently contacted me regarding the excessive shade on his house from the trees opposite to him. My constituent asked whether some pruning may occur to enable some sunshine and warmth on his home during winter. My constituent has also mentioned to me that he cannot consider the installation of solar panels because of the excessive shade, rendering the installation of solar panels useless. I would appreciate if you could investigate and advise, etc., etc. And the response I received, Madam Deputy Speaker, said, "Thank you for your letter on behalf of my constituent regarding excessive shade from trees growing across the street from his house at the address. The trees growing opposite your constituent's property are predominantly remnant eucalypts, which predate the suburb and as such are considered crucial habitat for native species in the woodland area. Whilst actively promoting the use of passive solar energy in new suburbs and new development areas, the government does not routinely remove or extensively prune sound, healthy trees to improve access to solar energy or reduce a resident's carbon footprint in established suburbs. As you would appreciate, there has to be a balance between residents gaining access to solar energy and the positive benefits provided to individuals and the community by urban trees. Urban trees provide many benefits, including shading in summer, thermal insulation, wind amelioration, improved air quality, reduced water runoff and habitat for wildlife. After considering all the factors, including the location of my constituent's house on the low side of the street, the government doesn't support the removal of the trees across the road from my constituent's residence. So what's going to happen in the future, Madam Deputy Speaker? Improving the tree canopy, we all agree that's important. What is that going to mean for solar access in future suburbs? Homes that are being encouraged to put solar panels on, but which will encounter significant shade into the future. It's a difficult situation, and as with many things that the government encounters, it doesn't necessarily have a simple solution. But promoting one aspect is going to have a perhaps, negative effect on another aspect of government policy. There isn't a clear policy direction, but what we're seeing is an attempt to impose more and more bureaucracy. The motion calls on the government to commence within 12 months joint reviews of the Territory Plan and TCCS infrastructure design standards to ensure that new subdivisions and urban renewal precincts can achieve the tree canopy targets. So do we want solar access in new suburbs, or do we want tree canopy? Because it's very, very difficult to achieve both. Commencing a review of the Tree Protection Act and the possible introduction of a tree curator to support the delivery of tree canopy cover targets. Another review, another curator. We already have a conservator of flora and fauna, and we have protected trees, and we have a lot of bureaucracy already in place to ensure that trees and plants are looked after and maintained. What we're seeing here is the potential for yet more regulation that may be inconsistent with other areas of government policy. And what this motion doesn't say is that there are millions of trees now growing across the valleys of Canberra, many, many, many on private land. In her foreword to Lindsay Pryor's seminal reference on Canberra trees in 1991, Rosemary Follett, the ACT's first Labor Chief Minister, said that this book will, and I quote, will be useful resource book to those involved in planning and planting trees in Canberra, end quote. The book notes that prior to European settlement of the limestone plains in the early 1820s, most of the valleys in which the various town centres of Canberra are now located were treeless. The 1991 book noted that in the following 170 years, these treeless plains had been planted with millions of trees, many of which are on private land. So in 1991, there are millions of trees where there had been none before. This had been done with no tree red tape. This had been done without overbearing bureaucracy. This had been done with no Tree Protection Act, no tree advisory panel, no tree preservation orders, and certainly no tree curator, as has been called for in Ms Lakuta's motion today. What we need, Madam Deputy Speaker, is sensible tree management processes. We need to be able to easily fix situations where poorly situated and selected large trees have been planted by well-meaning but ill-advised people. We need sensible tree preservation to enhance solar access. We need less unnecessary bureaucracy. And it's worth noting that prior to 1991, where we had no tree preservation orders in place, but we had millions of trees, the government has also cut down a lot of trees, including 450 trees on Northbourne Avenue. No one seemed to care about those trees being chopped down. So I don't believe we need targets. I don't believe we need a tree curator. We do need to review the Tree Protection Act. But for private homeowners, let's make it more flexible and less bureaucratic. Let's have less restrictions. People have shown their love of trees. People like to put trees in their yards. They like to have shade. They like to have trees for their children to play in and on and under. They like to see the progression of leaves and structures throughout the year. Let the government get on with planning better open spaces, but it doesn't need targets and legislation, just better management. And I'll refer once again to an article that was in the Riot Act yesterday, where former planning commissioners called to arms over the government's development incompetence. It says in this article dated yesterday, a former National Capital Development Commissioner will tonight issue a wake-up call to the ACT's community councils and residents groups in a hard-hitting speech that accuses the Barr government of corrupting due process and being incompetent, and goes on to say he will call on them to target the Environment Planning and Sustainable Development Directorate and its head for not doing its job properly. It doesn't carry out the necessary investigations into the community needs to be served, the likelihood of adverse environmental impacts, the compounding effects of multiple development approvals in residential and suburban shopping areas, and the provision of public transport and public parking availability. He would say, the Directorate's planning section is chronically understaffed and can only process development applications which it manages poorly. So what we see is a Directorate that is already, according to this particular person, chronically understaffed and unable to do their current job properly. What we're talking about is adding additional bureaucracy and regulation in this area, when what we would actually need to see is better management of what's already there, better trust of the community to make decisions, including about trees on their own land, and less confusion and contradiction in government policy. Tree canopy, solar access. It seems like the tension between them is something that is difficult to resolve, and this flip-flopping of policy is going to make it even more difficult for people who may make a significant investment in solar panels for their home to achieve the outcome that they were seeking when they invested in those solar panels for all the right reasons, including whether they're dictated by government that they must have them. But for many people, it's a conscious decision that they make to install solar panels. Those in older areas will find it difficult because of existing trees. Those in new areas obviously want trees for many of the reasons that Ms Lakuta has outlined, but are going to find it difficult with respect to solar access. So let's not make the situation even worse than it already is.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Ms Fitzharris.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank Ms Lakuta for moving this motion today and for the opportunity to speak. Indeed, as has been noted, it is widely recognised that trees are such an important element of all urban landscapes, contributing to the livability of cities. None more so, Madam Deputy Speaker, than Canberra, the bush capital. A healthy urban forest underpins the economic, cultural, environmental and social fabric of Canberra. It is also one of the key responses in our preparing for a warming environment, increasing our resilience and sequestering carbon. We're fortunate, and indeed the envy of many cities across the world, that we have such a diverse, healthy and well-established urban forest. More than 750,000 trees, which are growing on public land, are managed across Canberra's urban landscape, including those on residential streets, major roads, median strips, shopping centres and other open spaces throughout the ACT's urban area. Even that impressive number excludes the trees located in our precious nature reserves right across Canberra. Living infrastructure, which includes trees, open green spaces, waterways and plants placed on the sides and tops of buildings, can provide an enormous benefit to our adaptation to future climate change. Trees help moderate temperature extremes, weather events, provide shelter, improve amenity and property values. All of these benefits, if properly considered, vastly outweigh the cost of planting and maintaining them. The importance of Canberra's urban trees to a livable and sustainable city is highlighted through the government's broad policy direction. This outlines the approach and identified challenges associated with climate change, population growth and urban heating to provide a more compact city with adequate shade and protection. Indeed, the Tree Protection Act 2005 is an important piece of legislation that helps protect Canberra's urban forest. As we know, there is currently an amendment bill to that Act seeking to implement minor technical changes before the Assembly. In 2011, the Commissioner for Sustainability and the Environment released the final report on the investigation into the government's tree management practices and the renewal of Canberra's urban forest. One of the recommendations of this included the establishment of a tree curator position. This role is currently being undertaken by the Conservator. Given that the Conservator's primary role relates to conservation issues and the Tree Protection Act is much broader, involving native and non-native trees, it is relevant that the role of the tree curator be reviewed to support the delivery of improvements in canopy cover for Canberra's urban forest. As noted, there are also a number of municipal infrastructure standards maintained by Transport Canberra and City Services that all government directorates, developers and contractors adhere to when planning and constructing areas within urban environments. Further work is required to prioritise new and replacement planting locations, including incorporating a variety of available information such as the age profile, species diversity, canopy cover, known hotspots and landscape style and condition. A clearly defined monitoring and assessment framework is an appropriate way to identify priorities to achieve canopy cover improvements across Canberra's urban forest. I'm pleased that the two directorates that share responsibility for the management of the urban forest are working cooperatively to further develop the policy objectives in a well-considered manner. There are many examples of this, but it also includes EPSDD and TCCS collaborating on the development of a living infrastructure strategy. At the heart of the strategy is the concept that trees are indeed a living part of the fabric of our city and provide a significant contribution to a wide range of sustainability objectives, including clean air, cooling in summer, rainfall detection, amenity and beauty, and habitat for wildlife. Indeed, as has been noted, this strategy is a key action in the government's climate change adaptation strategy, which also takes a cross-government approach to ensuring that the ACT is able to respond to a changing climate in a considered and well-managed way over the short, medium and long term. The government recognises the need to maintain and ultimately increase the canopy cover of our urban forest. TCCS has access to high-quality remote sensing data that enables canopy cover to be mapped and analysed with a high degree of accuracy. This data can be combined with information about active travel routes, outdoor recreation areas and other key components of our city that would most benefit from an increase in canopy cover. This creates a powerful tool that will enable additional plantings to be targeted and be of maximum benefit. Meanwhile, the government has continued to support the management of the existing urban forest through ongoing funding for the Urban Treescapes team. Madam Deputy Speaker, in September this year I was pleased to launch the Better Suburbs initiative, which will importantly firstly seek community views from across all sectors of our community to determine the relative priorities in regard to the delivery of city services, which will then be used to inform a Better Suburbs statement next year. This is very exciting, and I'm even more excited about the prospect of the second phase of this project, which will seek to address some of our more long-term and challenging urban issues. One of these, indeed, is managing our urban tree canopy, especially on private land, and implementing a strategy to balance the needs of a more dense, growing and prosperous city with the need to maintain the health and amenity of the treed landscape. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased to support most of Ms Lakuta's motion, but move the amendment circulated in my name that just makes a few amendments.
The question is that the amendment be agreed to. Ms Fitzharris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My amendment, in effect, is identical to Ms Lakuta's amendment, but does provide some different details on the timeframes in which certain actions will be taken, and I think that will allow us to both get on with the important job of reviewing the territory plan, the infrastructure design standards that are important within TCCS, within 1 year, within the second year, to start delivering actions to increase Canberra's tree canopy, to complete these joint reviews. And they are linked, as has been discussed, between the territory plan and the infrastructure design standards, and deliver a framework for the assessment of the tree canopy cover and conditions, and allow ongoing monitoring to make sure that our tree canopy can be increased, and within 3 years report back to the Assembly on the delivery of these activities by the last sitting day in July. Madam Deputy Speaker, we recognise the need to grow and maintain our urban forest and our overall living infrastructure. The role of the Tree Protection Act is paramount in this, and we look forward to it being reviewed and those recommendations being considered by government over the coming years.
The question is that the amendment be agreed to. Mr Gentleman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank Ms Lakuta for her motion, and I'll be supporting Ms Fitzharris' amendment to the motion. Madam Speaker, the bush capital, a garden city, a city and a landscape, these and many other terms have been used to describe the unique setting in which Canberra, the nation's capital, sits. And the one thing all of these titles have in common is the creation of a substantial urban forest which frames Canberra city and suburbs. Canberra is known as the bush capital for its highly valued open spaces, such as the hills, ridges and buffers throughout our city. Its rich diversity of landscapes within the urban forest, which contribute to the quality of life all Canberrans and the experience of visitors to the nation's capital see every day. From the beautiful vistas of eucalypts on the surrounding hills and distant mountains to the stunning colours of autumn in our suburbs and the habitat our native trees and shrubs provide for so many of our Australian native birds and animals, our landscape setting is highly valued for its visual amenity and many environmental, social and cultural and economic benefits. The planning of a city within a treed landscape is a strong principle on which Canberra's planning legacy is founded. Walter Burley Griffin was strongly influenced by the City Beautiful and Garden City movements which influenced town planning during the late 19th and 20th centuries. And Madam Speaker, we spoke of this on a recent National Trust visit to Blandfordia on the weekend, looking at our treed city in that area with the National Trust. Together with the attributes of the Garden City movement, particularly the planning for communities where people work or live surrounded by green belts, and the City Beautiful movement promoting wide boulevards, elegant parks, recreational waterways and riverbanks, it's easy to see how the city envisaged by Griffin in his 1912 plan has carried through to today. Maintaining and managing the green infrastructure, particularly the treed landscape, is, as Ms Lakutia's motion notes, highly important as we move towards increasing densification and renewal in the city. The ACT Government has already taken significant steps to plan and prepare for this challenge. This includes developing the Climate Change Adaptation Strategy and the Living Infrastructure Plan and Urban Tree Renewal Plans. These work with the broader planning for the territory and the city, and we're in the early stages of commencing a review of the ACT Planning Strategy and Territory Plan and associated urban design standards and guidelines. Specifically, the Climate Change Adaptation Strategy includes resilience indicators to provide targets for shade from trees in residential areas. In a changing climate, we must look after our trees as they look after us and our environment. In part, this is being delivered through the Climate Change Adaptation Strategy through the development of the Living Infrastructure Plan. By the end of 2018, this will include targets for urban tree canopy cover. With more than 750,000 government-managed trees in urban areas, this living infrastructure is extremely valuable, and we do not want to lose one of our greatest assets. The urban forest is captured in the ACT greenhouse gas inventory, and any substantial growth or loss to the forest impacts on our greenhouse gas emissions. By growing our living infrastructure, we'll see a net benefit of carbon sequestration. Living infrastructure, which includes trees, open green spaces, waterways, and even plants placed on the sides and tops of buildings, can provide an enormous benefit. They help moderate temperature extremes, including the heat island effect, and extreme weather events. They provide shelter, improve value and amenity, and it's been even demonstrated that they are a positive contributor to improved mental health. These benefits contribute a much broader value to our communities. The ACT Government recognises the need to grow and maintain our urban forest and overall living infrastructure. It's one of the key responses in our preparing for a warming environment and increasing our resilience. Madam Speaker, the Territory Plan currently contains provisions relating to Canberra's tree canopy. These include provisions in the Estate Development Code that require new subdivisions to provide street trees that, at maturity, achieve reasonable summer shade to footpaths and shared paths with regard to heat gain and user comfort. As part of the implementation of the Climate Change Strategy, the ACT's planning framework, including the ACT Strategic Plan, will be reviewed in conjunction with the Territory Plan to ensure that future planning of Canberra, amongst other things, enables the presence of trees to be the norm of what people expect to see in the streets of Canberra. This includes businesses, recreation and residential areas. The review of the ACT Strategic Plan will have a renewed focus on newly developing areas and the importance of trees as part of the urban fabric, as a demonstration of importance of the landscape, particularly trees, to the sustainability of Canberra. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sure that you're aware of the short-term sustainability benefits of trees, including the amelioration of the effects of extreme weather events such as heat waves. While improving sustainability is important to the city, many people love trees as they add to the rich fabric of the city and soften the built environment. In doing so, trees improve the overall amenity of the city and the people who live and visit it. The Garden City approach to planning has followed a continuous process of refinement to suit changing lifestyle preferences. As we contemplate the growth of Canberra's population to 500,000 by 2031, careful thought is required to ensure planning and design outcomes suit the future needs of this population, yet retain Canberra's Garden City character. Madam Deputy Speaker, while undertaking consultation on my 2015 Statement of Planning Intent, it was evident the community wants to see the use of water-sensitive urban design and living green infrastructure in our new and renewed urban environments. It was this strong sentiment that led to the inclusion of planning priorities to create sustainable and living neighbourhoods with better transport connections and deliver high-quality public spaces and streets through placemaking. On my recent trip leading a delegation to Europe as part of the European Union World Cities Programme, I was keen to see how Copenhagen and Singapore, who are at the forefront of creating successful urban open spaces, parks and green infrastructure that respond to people and place, were dealing with this issue, and I wasn't disappointed. I saw many examples of the significant character and amenity being gained from the use of mature trees to shade private spaces and bicycling areas, and the strong will to deliver green infrastructure in new and innovative ways. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased to say that Canberra is not lagging in this place. The planning and design of our city plays a major role in how much active living we can undertake in our daily routines. And providing comfortable public spaces with good quality green infrastructure plays a major role in supporting active lifestyles. Active living is a way of life that integrates physical activity into daily routines, such as walking the dog or using public transport rather than taking the car to work. You may also be aware of draft variation 348 being prepared to incorporate 6 active living principles into the Territory Plan. This draft variation is supported by contemporary research on the benefits of good quality public places and living infrastructure. Research has shown the net positive impact of public realm improvements on existing retail performance, urban regeneration, tourism and property prices. This research found that a well-planned improvements to public spaces can boost footfall traffic and trading up to 40%. Also found that in some places the provision of green spaces has led to rents increasing of up to 20%, and for every 1% increase in green spaces has led to a 0.3 and 0.5% rise in average house prices. DV 348 will not only help Canberrans meet the National Physical Activity Guidelines on a regular basis, but also encourage new developments and redevelopments to provide living infrastructure, making them more active to investors and for the more attractive, to investors and the surrounding residents. Madam Speaker, I welcome the joint review to the Territory Plan and TCCS's infrastructure design standards to consider appropriate provisions to achieve tree canopy targets. This will ensure that the urban renewal precincts and other new subdivision areas can have sufficient tree canopies to help ameliorate urban heat island effects and enhance the amenity of these areas. In closing, Madam Speaker, the government is acutely aware of the value of trees to both this generation and to future generations of Canberrans. In this respect, the government will need to consider how to fund the green infrastructure, particularly the existing and proposed new trees across the city. It's well known that these costs are high, but as I've identified, so are the benefits. In this respect, we're currently undertaking a number of actions as part of our planning work that address the ongoing importance of tree canopy and living infrastructure and celebrate Canberra as a garden city.
Question is that Ms Fitzharris' amendment be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Did you want to close?
Very briefly close. Look, I'm very heartened by the unanimous support for trees in this chamber. I mean, I was confident there would be a support for trees, and I'm very pleased to hear it. Ms Lauder may well be right that it's one of the reasons we're the number 3 place to visit, especially in autumn, I would say, from that point of view, where some of Canberra is absolutely glorious. I think that is something that that continues to be a combination of government and private actions. I know you're talking about Lindsay Pryor. There was a lot of work done in that time by the government just to plant and a lot of support given to the private sector in that. Yes, there are sometimes trade-offs between trees and solar access, but it's really a question of good design and working out where to put everything. And we can and must have trees, and we can and must have adequate solar access. And I'm very pleased that the Assembly is standing up for trees today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Lakuta. So the question now then is that the motion as amended be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. I have been informed that I need to call the clerk, Mr Steele.
In accordance with Standing Order 103, I inform members that Mr Coe has lodged the following notice of motion: that this Assembly no longer has confidence in the Chief Minister, Mr Andrew Barr, MLA, due to the government's engagement in corrupt decisions.
Clerk?
Business, notice number 6.
So, thank you. The max. Mr Steele.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move the motion standing in my name on the notice paper relating to renewable energy initiatives.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Mr Steele.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm very pleased to bring forward this motion before the Assembly this evening. Since the government's re-election in October, we have been working hard to deliver on our election commitments and continuing our responsible steps to manage climate change and our environment. Delivering 100% renewable electricity by 2020, we are leading the nation and making sure that Canberra remains one of the most livable and sustainable cities in the world. We are leading when others have been lacking leadership on climate change. Those seeking to reverse the transition to renewable energy and who are attempting to pull coal out of the swamp from which it came. That is why, more than ever, we in this Assembly need to continue to support the ACT Government's leading role in renewable energy and continue to take responsible steps to support the transition to renewables, and including harnessing new innovations and the power of battery technology. Madam Speaker, in the lead up to last year's election, ACT Labor made a commitment to continue to build an even more sustainable city and to work towards carbon neutrality. We're presently on track to reach 100% renewable electricity by 2020. Just earlier this year in April, the Ararat Wind Farm began operating at full capacity, providing renewable electricity into the grid to power 37,000 homes in Canberra. Just a couple of weeks ago, we saw the completion of Canberra's solar highway with 36,000 solar panels added to the Williamsdale solar farm. Canberra's solar highway incorporates 3 other solar farms and will generate 85,000 megawatt hours of electricity every year, powering 11,000 homes across our territory. By building a more sustainable territory, we will spur investment, innovation and the creation of new industries and jobs in the clean energy sector. We've already seen a 400% increase in local renewable energy jobs between 2010 and 2015. And this is in the context where national jobs in the sector were in decline. So we only need to imagine what we can achieve as we continue our further investment in the renewable energy sector. But we must acknowledge that government isn't acting alone. Whilst the ACT government has a direct role to play, we must also acknowledge the importance of individual Canberrans and businesses in delivering a more sustainable Canberra through the home that they live in and the vehicles and transport that they use every day. Madam Speaker, this motion supports the rollout of battery storage in households and businesses in the ACT and how we can best harness these technologies and the opportunities that they offer as we transition to renewable energy. Traditionally, the national electricity market has been designed to operate with conventional forms of electricity generation, such as coal, gas and hydro. However, the market is undergoing the most significant transformation since its inception with the integration of renewable energy into the electricity grid. And battery storage is poised to become the next major consumer-driven development of energy technology, according to Alan Finkel, Australia's chief scientist. 1.5 million Australian households have invested in rooftop solar on their homes, and according to the Australia Institute, 80% of those households are considering buying batteries. A Climate Council poll, Energy Storage poll of Australians August 2017 revealed that 9.1% of ACT residents already own a battery system, which is the highest in Australia. And Madam Speaker, the ACT is already leading the nation by encouraging the take-up of battery storage and solar technology, which is part of the ACT's transition to renewables and meeting our 100% renewable energy target by 2020. In 2016, the ACT government awarded 3 grants of $200,000 each for Canberra households and businesses to install battery storage systems across the ACT. And following a successful pilot program in 2016, we announced that under the Next Generation Renewables program, we would invest $25 million for battery storage systems for Canberra households and businesses, making it one of the largest rollouts of battery storage in the world. However, there are further opportunities for the ACT government to harness the uptake of household solar and battery systems, not only through the continuation of installation grants, but also by looking at reforming the way in which these systems operate in the market. While it is great that so many Canberrans are taking up household batteries, these batteries are known as behind the meter, which means that they help to store power for household use, but that's it. As the Australia Institute puts it, they are essentially a microgrid of one household. At the National Energy Summit in Sydney recently, the CEO of Canberra-based company Reposit, Luke Osborne, said, "So with these batteries, we are getting what I call energy hermits, batteries that are not associated with a retail plan, so that all of this energy is not available to help the grid." It is really unfortunate that our current ACT energy retailers, ActuAGL and Origin, have not responded, as retailers in other states have, to accommodate battery systems in their energy plans so that they can benefit the wider grid. And as the Reposit CEO said, retailers are not moving fast enough to offer new plans. In other jurisdictions, some minor energy retailers are providing plans which enable household battery storage to participate in the market. They are doing this by partnering with innovative companies like Reposit. The Reposit Power Meter and software communicates with the grid and the solar producer consumer. It sells back energy to the grid at times of high demand and high prices and credits this to the consumer in what it called grid credits, thereby supporting grid stability and offering consumers incentives for their participation in the electricity market. Now, I hope that as a result of highlighting these issues in this motion today, we can get our energy retailers in the ACT to start harnessing these types of technologies. Overseas, the United States has proposed changes to regulations to require market operators to revise their electricity tariffs to better accommodate the participation of battery storage systems and allow for distributed energy resources. Here in the ACT, we can start with the ACT government investigating options with ACT energy retailers to accommodate battery storage, including the availability of distributed battery power to the grid during times of peak demand and associated electricity tariffs. Madam Speaker, investment in large-scale battery storage systems along with household solar are part of the future of the national electricity market. The uptake of battery storage means that consumers will be able to meet their own electricity needs, and with the right accommodations, will also allow for dispatchable energy for the national electricity market, so that when demand exceeds supply, the electricity grid can draw on stored household energy at the time that it is needed, providing stability to the market and supporting a stable transition to renewable energy. Madam Speaker, when we hit 100% renewable energy in 2020, 68% of the ACT's emissions will come from vehicles and transport. And again, battery technology will also play a key role in reducing the ACT's carbon emissions from vehicles and transport. In order to meet our zero net emissions target by 2050 at the latest, we must work to improve the uptake of electric vehicles, both within the government fleet and private vehicles. The ACT government is working to reduce public transport emissions. In August, Minister Fitzharris unveiled a fully electric and a hybrid Volvo bus for Transport Canberra, to be joined by a third bus in December. These 3 buses are part of a trial which, at the end of 2018, will allow the ACT government to better understand the viability of using electric buses as an ongoing part of the future bus fleet. The new bus depot for our expanding fleet, due to be built in my electorate in Phillip, will also include a recharging station for these buses. This is coupled with the ACT government's light rail project, which will be a significant part of our integrated transport network in the future and will also operate on 100% renewable electricity. However, it should be noted that public transport generates only about 3% of transport emissions. Whilst we must continue to encourage the take-up of public transport, we also need to encourage the take-up of private electric vehicles in the ACT. Madam Speaker, the end of the internal combustion engine is in sight. According to the If You Build It, They Will Charge It report from the Australia Institute, the average passenger vehicle sold in Australia in 2014 emitted 188 grams of carbon per kilometre. Electric vehicles, particularly when the source of electricity is 100% renewable, will significantly reduce carbon emissions from passenger vehicles. Firstly, the affordability of electric vehicles in the take-up of electric vehicles for their private use is important. Our government has already lowered duties for fuel-efficient cars, and electric cars are gradually becoming less expensive. And Bloomberg New Energy Finance analysis predicts that by 2025, electric cars will become cheaper than conventional cars. Secondly, giving people peace of mind that they have a place to charge their electric vehicle is vital in order to make consumers confident enough to purchase an electric vehicle in the first place. And that's why it's excellent to see the NRMA announce the rollout of vehicle recharging points. This will see at least 40 charges or more than double what is in the current network provided in New South Wales and the ACT. And AGL for some time now has had an ACT network of 3 rapid charges taking 30 minutes to recharge and 5 fast charges taking a few hours to recharge your car. There are other ways that governments can assist in this area. Other countries have looked to providing free parking and charging points in city areas, providing travel in dedicated bus and transit lanes, exempting EVs from registration taxes, providing road user charges exemptions, and looking at ending sales of petrol and diesel vehicles within a certain time frame. We also need to consider our current laws and regulations across a whole range of areas to support batteries and chargers, particularly how battery chargers can be facilitated in new developments and retrofitted in existing developments. And that's why it's important the ACT government continues to explore mechanisms that are right for us and our circumstances to encourage greater use of electric vehicles here in Canberra. Madam Speaker, our territory and our government has a lot to be proud of. We are on track to deliver 100% renewable electricity by 2020. We are working to improve the uptake of battery storage for households and businesses, and we're also actively working to curb emissions from vehicles, particularly in our public transport system. As we continue to work within the ACT Labor-Greens agreement to reach zero net emissions by 2050 at the latest, it is important that we encourage the government to investigate ways to harness the opportunities battery storage provides by working with ACT energy retailers to provide for aggregate demand responses. And as we strive to reduce our carbon emissions, encouraging the take-up of public transport and looking to provide best practice regulatory and policy responses to encourage greater take-up of private electric vehicles, we'll be on the right path to a clean energy future. I commend the motion to the Assembly.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Ms Lee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank Mr Steele for the opportunity to speak on this motion today and to respond on behalf of the Canberra Liberals. I understand one of the functions of the Admin and Procedure Committee is to, quote, ensure that the practices and procedures of the Assembly remain relevant and reflect best practice, end quote. Perhaps Mr Steele and indeed all members might benefit from some guidance from the committee about the drafting of motions, particularly with respect to length and relevant points on the topic. I do not intend, Madam Speaker, to go through each point. Indeed, if I were to do that, I would certainly run out of time. I can only assume that Mr Steele's intent was to ensure any and every possible reference to anything vaguely related to or in the vicinity of energy policy got a mention. So rather than focusing on the mishmash of what this motion does include, I will direct my remarks to what it does not include. Not once, Madam Speaker, does this motion refer to affordability or reliability of energy for ACT residents, bar a passing generic reference to economic costs of climate change. This motion takes no less than 7 paragraphs out of 24 paragraphs of notes to talk about the ACT government's investment in programs to support the take-up of battery storage and mentions the need and desire of the ACT government to assist households to invest in battery storage. This motion goes on to suggest the ACT has one of the most ambitious battery incentive programs in the country. This I do not dispute. But not once does the cost to consumers play any part in the narrative, and not once does reliability of supply play any part in the narrative. One could be cynical and suggest that a strong reason for the ACT government to be anxious about increasing the uptake of battery storage is because they know that there is a very real prospect of Canberra households losing power this summer. We all know that we dodged a bullet in February this year, and if all predictions come true, we will have insufficient power this summer, irrespective of how much the ACT government is paying wind and solar power suppliers. Indeed, during estimates, Directorate staff suggested there was a risk of load shedding, in other words, Madam Speaker, blackouts, and subsequently the Minister for Climate Change and Sustainability said he has asked Directorate staff to prepare a communications plan to warn ACT residents before summer about this risk. The Minister also announced early last month that the ACT would invest a further $4 million into home battery subsidy scheme, and so far more than 200 batteries had been installed. He is hoping that within the next 3 years up to 5,000 Canberra homes and businesses would have around 36 megawatts of energy storage. This is all part of the $25 million Next Generation Energy Storage program. This motion fails to mention the cost side of battery, and you cannot, in all good conscience, talk about benefits without also talking about the cost. Before those on the opposite side of the chamber start to suggest that we are anti-renewable energy or opposed to battery programs, let me reiterate that the Canberra Liberals supported the government's 100% renewable energy target in the last term, and we confirmed our commitment earlier this year. Madam Speaker, this commitment was an acknowledgement that the ACT government took advantage of the burgeoning but uncertain renewable energy sector, and as I have previously done and I do so again, I commend the ACT government in moving so quickly to secure a good deal for ACT residents. However, in reaffirming our commitment to this target this year, we did make it clear at the outset that affordability and reliability are essential factors that need to be considered in any future energy policy discussion. This motion, Madam Speaker, fails to make any reference to that. The benefit to ACT residents and the cost of living pressures they face on a daily basis are a vital concern to the Canberra Liberals. We know that under this government, Canberrans' cost of living pressures and their financial welfare take a backseat to almost every other priority. Throughout this motion, we see example after example of idealistic notions that drive a philosophical agenda. What is completely lacking, however, are practical issues of cost, suitability, deliverability and reliability to drive a sensible and relevant public discussion on how the ACT will continue to remain a leader in reducing our carbon footprint. But then again, Madam Speaker, such approaches are typical of Labor Greens government, so it should come as no surprise. This motion takes on an almost sanctimonious tone when mention is made of the fact that the ACT government is committed to and on track to reach 100% renewable electricity by 2020, that the ACT government has signed the Under 2 MOU committing to zero net emissions by 2050, that the ACT is on track to achieve a reduction in emissions of 40% from 1990 levels by 2020, that the ACT is committed to mitigation and adoption to climate change as a, quote, state and global actor, end quote. These might be regarded as laudatory aspirations, but as we know, the Minister did sign the Under 2 MOU without having any clear idea how the ACT would meet this commitment or with any consideration as to at what cost. And because that policy work was not done either before the Minister jetted off to sign the MOU last November or since, it seems, we now have a backbench member of the governing party calling on his own government to develop a strategy as to how we will reach zero emissions and carbon neutrality. The only possible suggestion contained in this motion to help the ACT lower emissions is to reduce or eliminate transport emissions, so that presumably means that this government has a plan to outlaw all public, commercial and private transport that is not electric or at least hybrid. Equally, we know that the ACT has secured contracts for an amount of electricity from renewable sources that seeks to equate the amount of electricity estimated to be used by ACT households by 2020. But whether that 100% can be carried over to beyond that, perhaps to a time when the ACT population expands faster than we can source from interstate wind farms, we just do not know. And does that factor in a wide use of electrically powered trams. I note that implied in this motion is a presumption that the ACT will embrace reduced private car usage, or at the very least switch to electric cars. Will such a switch increase our electricity usage? Has modelling been done on that? Has a cost-benefit analysis been called for? Apart from geographic practicalities for a territory that is hundreds of kilometres from a major city or coastline, again, there is no consideration of cost. There is a magic pudding notion of grants and subsidies to be paid for by who? Is this the government signalling yet another reason to gouge ACT ratepayers? Madam Speaker, this motion achieves little, represents little and does little in advancing the public debate on how the ACT will meet the challenges of affordable and sustainable renewable energy supply into the second half of the 21st century. Canberrans deserve more than symbolic and tokenistic public commitments to targets that look good on paper. Labor and Greens governments around the country are quick to howl down the lack of action by the federal government on energy policy, and yet in the ACT, where we have a tripartisan agreement on 100% renewable energy targets by 2020, where we have a commitment from all three major parties to work toward a sensible, practical public discussion on how the ACT will remain a leader in this sector, we have a motion with a mishmash of airy-fairy statements which completely ignores the realities of how we will safeguard reliability and cost of energy for all Canberrans. Madam Speaker, we need sound, evidence-based policy, not atmospheric speeches, such as the one the Chief Minister delivered in October last year when, gloating over his election success, he said, and I quote, "We have been re-elected to join California and South Australia as signatories to the Under 2 MOU and to set firm targets to get the zero emissions by 2050. We will do both of these things within the first 100 days. Well, it is now 360 days since the Chief Minister made that statement, Madam Speaker, and we have today a Labor backbencher calling on his own government to, quote, develop a strategy with firm interim targets for the ACT to reach zero net emissions and carbon neutrality by 2050 at the latest, in line with the Labor-Greens agreement for the 9th Legislative Assembly," end quote. The adage that you can fool some of the people some of the time, but not all of the people all of the time, comes to mind. Madam Speaker, the Canberra Liberals have confirmed our support for the 100% renewable energy target to 2020, and we have demonstrated that we are prepared to have an open and honest debate about what is possible in the ACT to improve our environmental footprint. We accepted the ACT government's earlier claims that moving to a renewable energy platform would save money for ACT ratepayers and deliver lower energy costs. In that instance, we had concrete action. We had contracts providing certainty of cost. We had the innovative reverse auction processes. What we now see is a government lost on how to move the energy debate forward with the 2020 deadline fast approaching. Subsidies and grants to attract support do not make energy affordable. Motions calling on the government to do something a year after an election promise do not make energy reliable. The Chief Minister takes almost every opportunity to remind us that his government was elected to take Canberra into the future, and this government is all too quick to take credit for being miles ahead in investing and innovating in this sector. But, Madam Speaker, the reality is when this government talks of sustainability, that's all it is, talk. There is nothing environmentally sustainable about a future that is not also economically and socially sustainable.
Question is the motion be agreed to. Ms Fitzharris.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank Mr Steele very much for bringing this important motion today, and still reeling somewhat from a speech from the opposition spokesperson on this matter, but I think it stands on its own merits or lack thereof. Madam Speaker, the government continues to deliver its election commitment to make Canberra a more sustainable city by reducing the carbon emissions caused by many factors, but notably in this case in my capacity as the Minister for Transport, by public transport and indeed private transport. We know that transport emissions account for around 1/4 of the ACT total's emissions today, but that beyond 2020 transport emissions are projected to be the cause of more than 2/3 of Canberra's total emissions. To reach carbon neutrality by 2050, we know that transport emissions must be addressed as a matter of priority. Transport Canberra has a clear mandate to provide low-emission public transport options for the ACT, while exploring alternate fuelled vehicles as an important step towards reducing emissions, increasing patronage and the important step of taking cars off the road will also have an even larger impact. As we know, the first stage of light rail will operate on 100% renewable energy from the time the first vehicle leaves the Mitchell depot in late 2018. The current diesel and compressed natural gas bus fleet accounts for around 1% of total emissions in the Territory and about 3% of emissions from the broader transport sector. While acknowledging that diesel and compressed natural gas buses both contribute to carbon emissions, it should be noted that switching from private car use to public transport use still has an incredibly positive impact for each and every commuter that makes this small change. That's why the government is making significant investments in public transport to attract people out of their cars and into mass public transport. As well as light rail, the ACT is making substantial investments in new bus rapid routes to be introduced next year, new buses and new ticketing equipment to make using public transport a more enjoyable and convenient customer experience. Recent improvements in battery technology will play a key role in reducing the ACT's carbon emissions, meaning electric buses are not only more efficient, but may also in the future become more economically and operationally viable, with obvious benefits for our environment. The government has committed to the purchase of new and replacement buses following an evaluation of the sustainable fuels bus trial that Mr Steele mentioned, which is currently underway. Transport Canberra has 2 contracts with 2 vendors to trial these alternate energy vehicles. The ACT government is also planning the design and construction of a new depot at Woden to house up to 120 buses. While these will incorporate diesel refuelling infrastructure, it will also be designed to accommodate a larger fleet of electric buses. These trials and investments demonstrate the ACT Labor government's commitment to improving our public transport system, while also leading the nation in our commitment to 100% renewable energy and lowering greenhouse gas emissions. Madam Speaker, the government considers the electrification of private vehicles a critical element in future reduction of emissions from the transport sector in the ACT. The ACT government itself has been trialling electric vehicles in its own fleet for a number of years. Future policy and programs relating to encouraging the uptake of electric vehicles will be considered as part of future ACT climate change strategy led by Minister Rattenbury, which will bring together both mitigation and adaptation measures, and importantly will be linked to the Transport for Canberra review. We will continue to work with other jurisdictions to promote a coordinated approach to encourage the take-up of electric vehicles in Australia. The ACT government has not yet installed any public electric vehicle charging infrastructure. However, ACTU-AGL has installed 8 chargers at 7 locations across the ACT as a pilot project. These are in the City, Canberra Airport, Tuggeranong Town Centre, Acton, Manukau and Belconnen Town Centre. ACTU-AGL have advised that information gained during their pilot is having a significant influence on their consideration of future locations. The government is also excited about the possibility of potential partnerships with organisations such as the NRMA, who on Friday last week announced a bold new strategy and signalled very clearly that they are keen to work together with local councils and governments to install public electric vehicle chargers across regional New South Wales and the ACT. And I congratulate the NRMA for their strong leadership on this matter. Clearly, the uptake of electric vehicles is a global trend gathering momentum, as I saw and reported on during the recent tour of North American cities in May this year. There is clearly a role for progressive governments like this ACT Labor government to help lead the transition to a lower emissions transport sector.
I beg your pardon, it being 6 o'clock. Mr. Gentleman.
Madam Speaker, I move that the question of adjournment be put forth with and without debate.
That question is that motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. The noes do have it. So we go back to Mr. Steele's motion. The question is that motion be agreed to. Mr. Rattenbury.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I welcome this discussion today and Mr. Steele bringing it forward, because this, of course, is an incredibly important and complex policy area when it comes to both addressing climate change from an adaptation point of view and from a mitigation point of view. I appreciate Mr. Steele's interest in energy issues and renewable energy technologies in particular, and I thought I'd particularly talk about some of the issues relating to battery technology. And in some ways this goes to the content of Ms Lee's speech, where she flagged the issue of reliability. there is no doubt that reliability is a key issue in the grid. And I'd like to talk about some of the points Ms Ley made in her speech a little later, because I think her speech actually represented a fundamental misunderstanding of a number of events that have taken place and the future questions of reliability in the energy market. But in terms of the original motion, Mr Steele has touched on some key points, because renewable energy and battery technologies and storage technologies generally will play a critical role in any future where we take serious efforts to address climate change. It's an area where we must make serious efforts and serious investment. Climate change is going to, and in fact is already, impacting on every aspect of the planet and its ecology, as well as every part of human society. The ACT government, as has been noted in the debate, has some of the most ambitious renewable energy and greenhouse gas targets in Australia and indeed the world. The government continues to take responsible steps to manage climate change and the environment through a number of programs and commitments, and they've been spoken of tonight. A commitment to 100% renewable electricity, a commitment to zero net greenhouse gas emissions, reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 40% from 1990 levels by 2020. So in that one, taking serious short-term action. A net zero emissions target that brings the ACT in line with the Paris Climate Agreement at a time when the US government is talking about getting out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Most other jurisdictions are actually going forward, and the ACT is certainly doing our part. And of course, I have to say the federal government's 8-page description of their new national approach to the national energy market gives me no confidence that the federal government is serious about meeting Australia's Paris Climate Agreement. But again, I'll come back to that later. Of course, the ACT also has a climate change adaptation strategy, because we must start to prepare for some of the changes that are coming towards us. We are driving innovation and investment in the clean energy sector, and we are supporting the rollout of 36 megawatts of energy storage across up to 5,000 ACT homes and businesses by 2020. Now, these are just the headlines of some of the things we're doing. Climate change and energy are some of the broadest and most complex policy areas, which perhaps goes to, I think Ms Ley made some sort of churlish comments about the length of Mr Steele's motion. But in fact, it is an incredibly complex area, and it does cross a lot of territory. I think there's actually very few people in Australia who actually understand the complexity of the labyrinthine national energy market. I genuinely think there is only a handful of people in Australia who can fully explain it and understand the rules. And that's just one part of the matrix of things that we need to deal with. Again, through the new national energy policy that's been flagged, as much as we understand any details of it, it's kind of ignoring some of the key issues in the transport space and the agriculture space as well. But again, I'll come back to that. I will for now focus on the issue of energy storage or batteries. So I think this is a very interesting area. Our next generation energy storage program is one of the largest of its type in the world. It began in April 2016 with a pilot scheme that aimed to test the market and inform the design of a wider program. The pilot scheme made grants of up to $200,000 available across 3 companies to support the installation of energy storage systems. The grants paid on successful installation of a storage system. The grants were awarded through a competitive process to ensure the best value for money for ACT customers and that strict safety and installation requirements are met. The benefits of battery storage technology are wide-ranging and include financial savings to customers and benefits to the wider electricity network, such as providing electricity to the grid during times of peak demand. That will lead to reduced network costs and provide a benefit to all electricity consumers. Now, members, of course, have heard about the Finkel report, also called the Independent Review into the Future Security of the National Electricity Market, Blueprint for the Future. It's the report that recommended the clean energy target that Malcolm Turnbull has famously ignored at Tony Abbott's behest. The Finkel report emphasised the importance of solar panels and battery storage. The blueprint suggested providing customers with financial rewards if they agree to manage demand by sharing resources of solar panels and battery storage. It also noted the role that certain market participants can play by revising their electricity tariffs to better accommodate the participation of battery storage systems and allow distributed energy resource aggregators to participate in the market. These are the kind of initiatives that consumers want to see. It allows them to exercise control over their electricity usage and costs, and at the same time they're able to alleviate demand on the broader electricity network. We're taking important first steps in this space through the ACT's battery program, and I expect to be making more progress in the coming months and years. Following the success of the battery pilot scheme, the ACT announced it would invest $25 million to continue the program to 2020. As part of that, a second grants round was announced in June 2016, with a further $2 million made available among 8 companies. The second grant round has seen a significant increase in the rate of residential battery installations, with over 300 batteries installed and a further 100 expected to be installed by the end of 2017. Interest in battery technology has been increasing, and the number of installations and the rate of installation is expected to increase significantly in the coming years. Despite the federal government desperately trying to prop up old and failing systems based on polluting fossil fuels, what we see from these figures is the public is looking ahead at the clean energy future. The ACT's battery program will soon be providing 1 megawatt of distributed generation in the Territory, making it potentially one of the largest sources of distributed generation in Australia. A third grants round, which I announced in September this year, will award up to a further $4 million to continue the program's success. The grants round will continue to award funds to battery installers through a competitive process to ensure ACT customers continue to receive the best value for money and safe, reliable energy storage systems. I expect to announce the outcome of the third round in December this year. The Next Generation Energy Storage Program has a major emphasis on the development of the local renewable energy industry. Companies participating in the program have to demonstrate the benefits they will provide to the local renewable energy industry. To date, these benefits have included the development of local trades training, research and development partnerships, and bringing businesses and experienced personnel to the ACT. This emphasis on the local economy forms part of the vision for Canberra to become a globally recognised centre for renewable energy innovation, investment and research. We can already see the impact of this vision. Renewable energy jobs in the ACT increased by 400% between 2010 and 2015, during which time the number of jobs in the sector declined nationally. That's a fantastic way for the ACT to buck the trend, and it's a real step towards actually diversifying our economy. And it shows you what happens when governments get serious and actually back this policy, because that difference between the ACT and the national trend reflects what governments were doing at that time. In that time, the ACT government was actually investing in renewables, buying supply of renewable electricity, while the federal government was dithering and in fact actively undermining the sector. Examples of how the ACT government's programs are transforming Canberra into a hub for renewable energy innovation, investment and research include international renewable asset management companies such as WindLab, Neoen, CWP and Global Power Generation have all based their Australian operations in the ACT, and as a result around 2,000 megawatts of renewable electricity generation across the world is being managed from the Territory. ITP Renewables, in conjunction with the CIT, is running an extensive program to trial lithium-ion batteries in Australian conditions, and Reposit Power, which Mr Steele spoke of earlier, a local company providing battery storage management services, has become a leader in renewable energy technology and innovation, ahead of the curve of the kinds of innovation envisaged by Dr Finkel in his review. Battery storage is integral to a future high-penetration renewables grid. With a future grid in mind, batteries installed under the program must meet a number of smart requirements to ensure they are ready for future requirements for smart energy grid. This includes being able to respond to changes in electricity prices and tariffs, to ensure customers are able to fully realise the financial benefits of their batteries, and they are capable of providing support to the electricity network. Each battery installed under the program also provides operational data that will be used for research, innovation and business development, with a focus on ACT businesses and institutions. Now, of course, there's much more to be said about the whole climate debate, but I do want to particularly turn to the issues of reliability, because I think that Ms Lee has expressed some concerns in this place, and it is important to set the record straight on some of these matters, both to assure this place and to assure the ACT community that this matter is being, I think, has been overstated today, but that the ACT government is taking it seriously. Firstly, let's reflect on the incident of February 11 this year, where there was the threat of the ACT facing a load-shedding moment, or blackouts, so we'll call them what they are, I don't mind, but the industry terminology is load-shedding. Canberra households did not lose power that day, and that was a result of probably some luck and some good management. The good management was on the part of the ACT government and ActUAGL moving rapidly to partner with a range of major users across the city to reduce demand in that key period between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. And as well as the call that I put out as the Minister, asking ACT households to do what they could. It also was a result of moves in New South Wales. But let's talk about what actually caused that brownout. It was a period of excessive heat, and it was the fact that coal-fired power stations in New South Wales were not able to operate because of that excessive heat. So let's talk about reliability and reflect on the fact that it was the coal-fired power stations in New South Wales, driven by issues of excessive heat through that jurisdiction, that actually drove the problem with reliability in the state that day. It's really important to reflect on, and it's ironic because those sort of excessive heat days we are going to see more frequently in the future because of climate change driven by coal-fired power. These are the very same power stations that are starting to experience reliability issues because of their age. And this becomes an interesting question as we see the Prime Minister positing a new national energy system where he relies on coal-fired power stations for reliability, and yet those coal-fired power stations both struggle to operate in the heat and are coming to the natural end of their lives. No investor anywhere on the planet wants to invest in new coal-fired power stations in Australia. So we're getting coal-fired power stations coming into their life. Most of them have got around a decade or less left. We've already seen Hazelwood close, not because of any action by environmental activists, ironically, but because the French owner was not prepared to invest in the future of that coal-fired power station. It was too expensive and not worth the financial return to make that investment. And Ms Lee also expressed reservations about this summer. I'm pleased to be able to update the Assembly that when AEMO released its forecast for this summer, the ACT was not on the list of jurisdictions it's concerned about in terms of energy reliability. I'm happy to provide copies of that report to members, but it is publicly available, and the ACT was not one of the jurisdictions for which the National Energy Market Operator expressed concerns. Now, I did answer in question time that I am preparing a communication strategy because the ACT was caught a little unprepared last year, but I'm determined that we won't be, and I want to make sure that if we have to make that call to the community again, that we're extremely well placed and our communications are clear and effective. That's about preparing for future risks. But I think there is a very serious debate to be had about reliability, and I don't think the federal government is delivering what we need when it comes to ensuring reliability in the future of the grid. In undermining renewables, which is what their package seeks to do, and we know it does that because Tony Abbott and his mates were cheering after the Liberal Party party room was briefed on this package last week. They were stoked with the new package. That tells us everything we need to know about it. The dinosaurs have won the debate in the Liberal Party room, and it's now going to be up to the states and territories to fix the mess that Josh Frydenberg and Malcolm Turnbull presented last week, because that 8-page piece of fluff is not good enough when it comes to the future energy grid for Australia. I commend Mr Steele for his motion today, and I'm pleased to support it.
Thank you, Mr Rattenbury. Question is that Mr Steele's motion be agreed to. Mr Barr.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank Mr Steele for bringing this motion forward today. As Canberra has a proud history of innovation in renewable energy, and the initiatives detailed in Mr Steele's motion will contribute to us maintaining that national and international leadership. Where the Commonwealth Government has spent the last few years dodging its responsibility to put in place clear and durable plans for Australia's transition to a low-emissions economy, we have been acting here in the Territory. As a government, we understand and accept that we must act now to cut emissions and to find cleaner ways to power our growth. The cost of putting off action will only mean that the adjustment will end up being sharper and more costly in the future. That's why it has been so disappointing and irresponsible of the current federal government to delay and delay again on delivering a clear long-term energy policy. Last week's announcement of their latest policy attempt bears many of the hallmarks of their prior efforts. Rushed, lacking in detail, and more responsible to the preferences and the internal battles within the coalition party room than the interests of our nation, our community and our economy. The ACT Government is of course keen to engage to see if possibly this time there is a policy that can deliver the emissions reduction that we need, and this would last through more than one electoral cycle in this country. Unfortunately, with so few details currently on offer, that remains very much to be determined. By contrast, Madam Speaker, the Territory Government is well on our way to delivering what is an ambitious emissions reduction and sustainability target. We've put in place supply contracts to see 100% of the Territory's energy provided by renewables by 2020, and we're growing a new industry in the Territory in the process. That's why, while the number of renewable energy jobs fell across Australia because of the Abbott government and then the subsequent policies of the Turnbull government, the number of renewable energy jobs in the Territory actually grew by 22% between 2010 and 2016. Because of the investments that we have already made and our clear policy direction, Canberra is now perfectly positioned to grow as a major knowledge and skills centre for the multi-billion-dollar renewables industry. We can and we will lead the next stage of this country's renewables transition, which involves developing battery and storage technologies needed to make renewables as reliable as other forms of power generation. Key renewable energy projects are now being driven from Canberra. The Canberra-based Neoen is working with Tesla to install the world's largest battery pack in South Australia, while WindLab will manage the new Ararat wind farm in Victoria. Our knowledge sector continues to be the engine room for innovation and growth and will underpin our continued national leadership. So, for example, Madam Speaker, WindLab, the ANU is partnering with WindLab to deliver Australia's first master's course in wind energy. While Global Power Generation is also partnering with the ANU and ActuAGL Distribution to trial new hydrogen technologies. We have an ever-increasing host of senior business leaders visiting Canberra to learn from our experience and to scope local investment opportunities. They come here both because of the expertise we have garnered and the strong positive story we have to tell. The world can embrace renewable energy and can capture huge economic advantages. Now, the ACT industry's rapid growth is no accident, Madam Speaker. It's come about through deliberate and smart policies by the ACT Government and the great work of Invest Canberra and Visit Canberra in promoting Canberra to the world. Our leading battery storage programs are also providing key competitive advantages for local industries and local businesses like Reposit Power, a global leader in smart battery technology. The Next Generation Energy Storage Program, which began in April of 2016, aims to support the installation of up to 5,000 energy storage systems in ACT homes. This will deliver the largest virtual power station, or VPP, in the world, which will provide critical power system security services, such as peak demand shaving, shifting and shedding, to use those industry terms. Our Canberra VPP presents an incredible opportunity for high-value research and development. And that's why the government has introduced strict requirements for data capture and smart battery capability. The government is in the final stages of procuring a cloud-based data platform that will host real-time data feeds from each of the battery systems. This will provide a significant data set of the performance of distributed battery systems, and the government will make this data available to local researchers and businesses to drive the next wave of innovation. So in conclusion, Madam Speaker, our booming renewable energy economy is a great example of how smart and progressive policies can deliver economic benefits to Canberra and bring the best and brightest talents to our city. I commend Mr Steele for bringing this motion forward and commend it to the Assembly.
Thank you. Before I call Mr Steele to close, I just want to draw to members' attention. We have a former member, Mr Steve Pratt. Welcome to your return to the Assembly. Thank you. Mr Steele, in closing.
Madam Speaker, looking around the chamber at this moment, later on a sitting day, I can tell the mood's electric for more than one reason. But the topic of this motion is electricity and renewable electricity, particularly batteries and the contribution that they can make to the stability of our electricity market. I'd like to thank members who've made their contributions this evening. It is excellent to see such strong support in the chamber from all sides in taking action on climate change. Our zero net emissions target is in line with the Paris Climate Accord, and our approach is very much in line with the Finkel review into what actions state and territory governments can take around energy and emissions. I would like to refer the opposition spokesperson, Ms Lee, to clause 3 of the motion, which does actually talk about stability expressly, and the references in part 3 to the Finkel review, which directly relates to the role of batteries and market stability and reliability. I didn't hear Ms Lee once refer to any substantive contribution about the role of batteries, and I hope that she will take some time to recharge by the time of the next sitting week, perhaps by reviewing the Finkel report, which are the major evidence base, of course, around the energy market and also the contribution of batteries as well. The Finkel Review Blueprint for the Future, independent review into the future security of the national electricity market, has recommended that we as a territory government engage with the COAG Energy Council to identify options for subsidised funding mechanisms for the supply of energy efficient appliances, rooftop solar photovoltaic and battery storage for low income consumers. The review outlines a blueprint that provides consumers with financial rewards if they agree to manage demand and share resources such as their solar panels and battery storage. And the report has also cited the lead taken in the US, where the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has proposed changes to the rules in order to require market operators to revise their electricity tariffs in order to better accommodate the participation of battery storage systems and allow for distributed energy resource aggregators to participate in the market as well. So, Madam Speaker, our government is on track to develop a strategy to reach zero net emissions and carbon neutrality by 2050, and this motion supports that goal. And the work of our government that we are doing and the leadership role that we've taken in continuing to invest in renewable energy programs and initiatives, such as the Next Generation Energy Storage Grants, which will continue to provide subsidies for battery storage installation in the ACT. And of course, the important role that we have in building an integrated transport network here in the ACT and encouraging the take-up of public transport. And that also means light rail as a genuine public transport alternative. I look forward to our government providing an update on the current trial of electric and hybrid buses in the ACT. And finally, Madam Speaker, we need to acknowledge where the bulk of our emissions will stem from post-2020, which is private vehicles, and that's why it's so important that our government is working to explore mechanisms to encourage the take-up of private vehicles in the ACT, supported by this motion. I commend it to the Assembly.
Thank you, Mr Steele, and I commend you for delivering that motion through somewhat of a chaotic few minutes here in the Assembly, given what was announced before your motion was called on. So, Mr Steele and members, the question is that Mr Steele's motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Mr Gentleman.
Madam Speaker, I move the Assembly do now adjourn.
The question is that the Assembly do now adjourn. Mr Barr.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Sorry, can we wind back one step before we adjourn? I've just got a motion that is about to be circulated. No.
That's the motion before us at the minute is that the Assembly do now adjourn.
Seeking to amend the sitting pattern to remove tomorrow, Tuesday and Wednesday of next week?
No, I'm not giving leave for that. So.
The only way you're going to be able to do it is to seek leave. I think you've been indicated leave won't be granted. Then we'll go through suspension. So the question before the floor is the Assembly do now adjourn. Mr Barr.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Perhaps if I can clarify and circumvent a range of issues that Mr Wall may intend to seek to suspend standing orders. There has been, as I understand, lodged by the Leader of the Opposition a motion of no confidence in me as Chief Minister. The standing orders do not preclude the Assembly from continuing to sit in the intervening 7 days before this motion of no confidence will be considered by the Assembly. The companion to the standing orders of the Assembly on page 94 in section 6.60 says, and I quote, "The delivery and reporting of a motion of no confidence has not precluded the Assembly from considering other business on the day of the notice of no confidence was delivered or reported on, or the days intervening before the motion was considered, though the usual practice has been for the Assembly to adjourn for the intervening period." So over the history of this place, there have been occasions where the Assembly has adjourned for a 7-day period and sitting days have been altered. There have been occasions where the Assembly has continued its normal course of business. I have consulted with other members in this place in relation to this matter, and it is the government's intention to continue the Assembly's business. The Assembly will, of course, give due consideration, as it should, to this most serious of motions moved by the Leader of the Opposition. I will say at this stage, having spoken to members in the Assembly, that I am confident that I will retain the support of the majority of members in the Assembly, and I think it is important that the business and the very important business that has been scheduled for tomorrow and for Tuesday and Wednesday of next week continue. That is not in breach of the standing orders. It is consistent with the advice in the companion to the standing orders, and for those reasons, Madam Speaker, it is the government's intention to continue with sittings. We will, of course, give precedence to this matter of no confidence on the 7th day, when it will be the first item of business. As I understand it, that would be in next week's sittings on the Thursday, the final scheduled sitting for this 2-week block, and the Assembly should rightly have that issue as the first item of business on that day. And that is how the government will proceed from here.
The question is that the Assembly do now adjourn. Mr Wall.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I move to suspend so much of standing orders so as to allow me to move the motion circulated in my name.
Question is that standing orders are suspended. Mr Wall.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The reason that we need to suspend standing orders is to move a motion which is being circulated in my name at the moment, namely which seeks to amend the Assembly's resolution of the 15th of December from 2016 relating to the sitting pattern for this year. Meeting with convention of this Assembly, which would give 7 clear days for members to consider the no confidence motion in the Chief Minister. Madam Speaker, a no confidence motion in the Chief Minister is the most severe and most heavily weighted motion that this Assembly can consider, and a want of confidence in the Chief Minister traditionally has seen a suspension of the Assembly for a period of 7 days with no business being conducted until that motion comes back on the 7th day for consideration with precedence. Madam Speaker, that has occurred in 2012 when Mr Seselja moved a motion against Chief Minister Gallagher. Again in 2008 when Opposition Leader Mr Seselja moved a no confidence motion then against the Chief Minister Mr Stanhope. Same as in 2007, Mr Stefaniak moving a motion against the Chief Minister Mr Stanhope. Mr Smith's motion in 2004 against Mr Stanhope. And likewise, when the roles were reversed and when Labor was on the opposition benches, in 2000 when Mr Stanhope moved a no-confidence motion in Ms Carnell, 1999 when Mr Stanhope moved 2 motions of no confidence in the then Chief Minister, Ms Carnell. Madam Speaker, the last occasion that a government sought to circumvent the importance and the gravity of a no-confidence motion in the Chief Minister was in fact in 1999 when the Liberals were in government, and it was those on the opposite side, the Labor Party, who squealed and kicked up a stink, and with your support, appropriately, in the end of the day, of the crossbench, the Assembly did suspend for 7 days to allow proper consideration of this motion. Madam Speaker, this motion isn't a farcical or whimsical no-confidence motion. This motion is quite a severe claim of no confidence in the Chief Minister. That is, that the Assembly has lost confidence in Mr Barr due to the government's engagement in corrupt decisions. Madam Speaker, it has been well litigated by the opposition in this place and through the media that this government has engaged repeatedly in a number of corrupt deals. Sadly, under Mr Barr's leadership, Canberra is becoming the corrupt capital, and it is poignant that this Assembly give that motion the proper consideration that it deserves by suspending the following day's sittings and not returning until next Thursday, being the 7th day, to consider this motion in line with the Self-Government Act. It has been convention in the modern era of this parliament that is the common practice. These motions aren't moved flippantly. This is the first time that a motion of no confidence in the Chief Minister has been moved since mid-2012. It's not done flippantly. It's not done without a substantive evidence base, and it's appropriate that these motions be given the consideration required. Mr Barr's refusal to honour convention merely highlights the arrogance and the blatant disregard that he holds for proper practice and for proper procedure, a characteristic that is evident through the operation of his government at every level, Madam Speaker. So I would urge members to support this suspension of standing orders, to support the motion to amend the standing order, the sitting pattern, and give this motion of no confidence the consideration that it deserves, that being that this Chief Minister has engaged in corrupt decisions as his time.
You should just be debating the suspension of standing orders, not the motion that you're referring to. On suspension of standing orders, Mr Gentleman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The government won't be supporting Mr Wall's suspension of standing orders. The Chief Minister's made it very clear, abundantly clear, how we're proceeding with this matter. And I want the Assembly to reflect on the 2 manager of government business meetings that I've had with Mr Wall and, of course, with the Greens, or Mr Wall's office and the Greens, in relation to bringing business for this next 2-week period, Madam Speaker, and particularly in relation to the grace that we gave the opposition for the suspension of government business on Tuesday to deal with Mr Dospot's speech. And I think it was the appropriate thing to do, Madam Speaker, but at no time during these 2 meetings with the manager of government business agenda has Mr Wall or any member of the opposition indicated that they wanted to move this particular motion or suspend the sittings for the period. And, Madam Speaker, they agreed to the government business and agreed to the private members' business that will occur over the next 2 weeks. So if there's any arrogance, Madam Speaker, it's that on the opposition that's providing the arrogance in this case. I think the government's been very graceful over this 2-week period. There's a lot of work for us to do. We've had to put a lot of government work off due to the motion that was allowed for Mr Dospot on Tuesday. And we have a lot of business to secure before the end of the year and a lot more business to do next year as well. So we won't be supporting suspension of standing orders.
On suspension of standing orders, Mr Rattenbury.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Greens will not be supporting the suspension of standing orders. We appreciate the significance of this motion and we will be looking at the details of the allegations very closely, as we're expected to do for such a serious consideration. But we are capable of doing that and continuing with the business of this place. So we don't feel that we need all of the next 7 days to consider it. We'll do it around the other work we have to do. As Mr Gentleman has just noted, there's actually a lot of work to be done in the next week. There's actually quite a full program. We think it is quite appropriate that that work does continue, particularly the limited number of sitting days. I did note Mr Wall's motion that he wants to debate does not actually put in any replacement sitting days, it simply deletes sitting days from the calendar, and certainly on that basis we could not support that motion. But we accept that, you know, the practice, there has been mixed practice in this place. It has certainly been in recent times, the practice to suspend. Equally, there have been occasions, as noted in the companion, where the Assembly business has continued. Of course, the no confidence motion must come up first thing next Thursday. We will support that happening. I don't think there's any dispute about that matter, but we don't see any need to suspend business for the program work over tomorrow and next Tuesday and Wednesday, so we will not be supporting the suspension.
Question is that standing orders be suspended. Those of that opinion say there's only 5 and 5 and done. It's done. The question is then put forward that standing orders are suspended. Those of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The noes have it. The noes have it. Is it division or majority? Division required. Ring the bells. We have substantial number of pairs.
There's a division call where, yeah, sure. You'll have good
Everyone's gone, really.
So I have...
Bar with Jones, but that'll be me. I'll go out.
Mitz, Fitz, Harris and Dosbot.
Yep.
Berry, Hanson, Cody, Parton, Pedersen, Milligan.
Correct.
I don't think it's appropriate they recruit you, Mr. Pratt. That's what I've got. I believe you got 5 missing. You got 5 missing, Mr. Gentleman. All those that can be present are present. So the question before us is suspension of standing orders. Clerk.
Mr. Barr?
No.
Miss Berry? Miss Birch?
No.
Miss Chain? Miss Cody? Mr. Coe?
Yes.
Mr. Dospot? Mrs. Dunn?
Yes.
Miss Fitzharris? Mr. Gentleman?
No.
Mr. Hanson? Mrs. Jones? Miss Kickett?
Yes.
Miss Lauder?
Yes.
Miss Lakuta?
No.
Miss Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Milligan? Miss Orr?
No.
Mr. Parton? Mr. Pedersen? Mr. Ramsey?
No.
Mr. Rattenbury?
No.
Mr. Steele?
No.
Miss Stephen Smith?
No.
Mr. Wall?
Yes.
The result of the division is ayes 6, noes 9, therefore it's resolved in the negative. Thank you. The question before us now is that the Assembly do now adjourn. Mr Rattenbury.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like today to speak about Mental Health Week, which was held in the ACT from the 8th to the 14th of October this year. Throughout Mental Health Week, we made an effort to raise community awareness and understanding of mental illness, reduce the stigma and discrimination associated with people living with mental illness, and promote positive mental health and wellbeing. This year's theme was Stronger Together and was about reminding people of our shared responsibility to reach out and support those in our community who are doing it tough. Conversation, understanding and connection with others are simple things we often take for granted. Yet people struggling with mental health issues can find themselves isolated, lonely and left to cope on their own. Stronger Together is about society being fully inclusive of people with mental health issues and seeing the experience of mental ill health as something that builds resilience and makes us stronger. 1 in 5 Australians are affected by mental illness every year. This makes it almost inevitable that someone close to us, ourselves, or someone in our friendship circle or workplace will be affected by poor mental health at some stage in our lives. We can all play a role in reducing the stigma around mental illness by encouraging those around us to seek help when they need it. There's certainly no shame in asking for help, and that was a very important message of Mental Health Week. In particular, this year, with the debate around marriage equality, many LGBTQ families are finding the public debate on the legitimacy of their relationships hurtful and distressing. As the ACT Discrimination Commissioner noted, as allies and bystanders, we can also do our bit to support those members of our community who may face discrimination in the course of their everyday lives. That's why the ACT Government has committed additional mental health support for our LGBTQ community during and onwards from the current debate. As the first dedicated Minister for Mental Health in the ACT, it was great to participate in a number of community events, including the Stronger Together community concert, which launched Mental Health Week. The concert featured local musicians and performers, and I'd like to thank Eleanor Ailey, Chris Endry, Capo and Duncan Sargent, who told their personal recovery stories through song. I was also pleased to open the Spanish Speakers Association event, which focused on art as therapy for mental health recovery. Art therapy provides people with mental illness a chance to express themselves in a safe and creative way. And I'd like to thank Carlos Torres and everyone from the Spanish Speakers Association for the invitation. The week also celebrated World Mental Health Awareness Day, and I was honoured to present the awards for Mental Health Week 2017. The awards recognise organisations and individuals who have made outstanding contributions to the improvement of mental health and wellbeing in the ACT community. I want to congratulate those who received awards and all those who were nominated and thank them for their continuing dedication. In particular, I want to mention the following award winners. Catherine Campbell, the winner of the Promotion, Prevention and Early Intervention Award. Dennis Strangman, the winner of the Mental Health Carer Award. Lynn Lipperback, winner of the Mental Health Consumer Award. Joanne Smith, winner of the Reciprocity Award. And Sarah Shepherd and Jackie Price, recipients of the Michael Firestone Memorial Scholarship. I was also pleased to attend the Mental Health and Wellbeing Expo in Garema Place, which provided information about how to access the programs, supports and resources of local mental health and wellbeing organisations. There was a broad diversity of organisations there. It was great to see so many represented, everything from the recognised mental health services through to those providing yoga support and many other services that support our community. I was also just like to acknowledge the Mental Health Foundation for their first fundraising dinner and gala dinner. It was a terrific night, and I look forward to that continuing over future years. Now, of course, all of this would not have been possible without the tremendous work invested in preparing and presenting all the Mental Health Week events. Of special notice, Simone Burek and the team at the Mental Health Community Coalition ACT, who organised and coordinated the week, as well as the ACT Mental Health Consumer Network, who helped organise the awards ceremony. I also want to acknowledge Genevieve Jacobs from ABC Radio Canberra, who was the ACT Mental Health Week ambassador, for all of her efforts throughout the week. Each of the events in Mental Health Week was designed to celebrate mental health as a source of strength and empowerment, to challenge negative perceptions and take a positive step towards reducing stigma by reaching out, starting a conversation and really connecting people with people who are struggling we can build a stronger, mentally healthier ACT.
Question is the Assembly do now adjourn. Ms Jane.
It's very fitting on the day that Lonely Planet has announced Canberra as the third best city in the world to visit in 2018 to alert the Assembly about yet another feather in Canberra's cap, and that's bringing Tim the Yowie Man to the world. For many, many years now, Tim has brought mysteries and his love for our great region together. He has delighted, dazzled, occasionally befuddled and educated readers with his Canberra Times column. He's introduced thousands of Canberrans to what it means to be a crypto-naturalist, a term Tim coined himself, meaning someone who is versed in the study of strange, rare and hidden phenomena. Through his work, Tim has shone a spotlight on all the weird and the wonderful things about our region. From hunting crayfish in the Brindabellas to catching ghosts in Gungahlin, Tim has travelled all over the capital region to tell untold stories, uncover new mysteries and, of course, search for the elusive Yowie. And Tim has steadily expanded his wonderful storytelling with books and with mystery and ghost tours. From unassuming properties just out of town or one of our major cultural institutions, his tours scratch the surface to reveal the intriguing and the little bit creepy. The fact that these tours are regularly sold out months in advance is a testament to the quality of his storytelling. And now, thanks largely to a local Canberra film crew led by the excellent filmmaker Justin Bush, we have Tim the Yowie Man, the series. In this way, Tim's distinct style of storytelling and uncovering of so many mysteries of our area can be shared with an even greater audience. And by doing so through film, we are seeing the Canberra region through Tim's eyes like never before. And in turn, we're promoting the Canberra region to the world like never before, just like Lonely Planet. I was honoured to help launch the series last Wednesday, and the first episode will be live on YouTube, I believe, this Saturday, just in time for Halloween. Viewers will be delighted by the series, which has 3 episodes and a number of mini-sodes showing off this region and the mysteries behind it, including a very important mystery that needs to be solved: where to get the best pie. Knowing the talent behind this project, it's no surprise that this series is such a professional production, but collectively, as a city, we can be no less proud of it. I guarantee that even those of us who know how enchanting and special our region is will be stunned at just how well the series has captured our region's beauty and its uniqueness. And just like the Lonely Planet recommendation, I think Tim's recommendations will encourage those who live here to explore their region, as well as attracting even more visitors. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Question is the Assembly do now adjourn. Ms Lee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A few weeks ago, I had the great pleasure of joining locals in Downer for their annual party at the shops. The celebration was held on a gorgeous mid-spring day at the local shops in Downer, which is beginning to bloom as an essential community space since its redevelopment 2 years ago. I was pleased to join in the fun and activities that included live music, workshops for seed bombing, wicking garden plots and worm farming, and face painting for the children. The courtyard was lined with stalls offering food and information, as well as second-hand clothes, plants, books and games. It was also great to see the recently opened Gang Gang Cafe buzzing with locals and busily brewing their awesome coffee. The Gang Gang Cockatoo, as you would know, Madam Speaker, is cherished as our territory's faunal emblem, and I'm sure the Downer Shops will be cherished by locals in much the same way. The Downer Shops is structurally very unique, with a complex that goes all around and encloses the courtyard with a raised, round grass knoll in the middle where the fountain used to be. It is now a safe and inviting area ideal for community engagement, and it was wonderful to see this lovely space used and enjoyed by the community at this particular event. Madam Speaker, we all know that Canberrans have a strong relationship with our local shops, and you may recall that I spoke about the future of the Kingston shops in this chamber only a few weeks ago. Our local shops play an integral part in providing vital services that are nearby and easily accessible. But they do more than that. Our local shops are vital to bringing the community together, and our beautiful city was designed around these community hubs. It is absolutely crucial that we encourage business activity and development in our local shops. The residents of Downer deserve a vibrant local shops. It's great to see some of the first fruits of this vibrancy at the Downer shops, and I can only imagine what the shops will look like in the years to come if supported and allowed to flourish. The physical shops have great potential with an oval nearby should the community wish to hold larger public events, and there is an abundance of residences within walking distance to make it a convenient gathering place. To ensure the vibrant future, we need to make sure that the government does not allow it to deteriorate in the same way that the Geraldine shops did. I've previously asked the government about its commitment to the local community about investment in the Downer shops from the sale of the old Downer Primary School, and the government has stated that no specific funding from the sale has been set aside to improve the shops. If the government is not willing to invest a tiny portion of money made on the sale of a community asset in the local shops that would benefit the entire community, then what confidence does the community have that its government is looking out for their best interests? Madam Speaker, it was a pleasure to catch up with members of the North Canberra Community Council, who I know now hold meetings at facilities at the Downer shops, as well as meeting members of the Downer Community Association. Well done to everyone who played a role in making this year's Party at the Shops possible and for their commitment to continuing the strong community spirit in Downer. Your dedication is fundamental to preserving the unique character of Canberra, a city which we can now boast is the third best in the world according to the Lonely Planet.
Thank you, Ms Lee. Question is that the Assembly do now adjourn. Those of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The Assembly stands adjourned until tomorrow at 10 a.m.